Okay, guys, we're going to get started. I want to go over really quickly how to submit your assignment files. So this is the first one that we're doing that you're actually submitting stuff to me. So I want to go through that whole process. Just watch my screen. I'm recording this as well. Just watch my screen to see sort of how I set this up, the naming convention that I'm looking for, all of that kind of stuff, and then how you actually submit it. And then if anybody has any questions, we'll go from there. Make sense? Okay, so for the first assignment, there are 4 different images that you're actually turning in, or 4 different profiles that you're turning in. I'm going to just treat it as if this was the image right here, this group of images. So these are all just obscure raw files, but this is basically, you have 2 options for doing this. Now, we're turning in multiple files for this first assignment. So for assignment 2.1, it called for you to turn in the 4 custom DNG profiles. So just imagine that these are those 4 DNG profiles. So you have 2 options. The first one is you can actually name each one of the individual files. So I'm going to start here and name this individual file. It starts with your last name first, not your first name first, your last name first. This helps me out immensely when I'm actually grading, because all of my grading comes in alphabetical order. So if you use your first name followed by your last name, I've got to go in and change all of that. Don't do that. So anyway, for me, turning in my assignment, it would be Engelhard, my last name, underscore first name, underscore the assignment number. So this would be assignment number 2.1. And then, because this is the first image that I'm doing in this group, it would be 0.1. Then I'm going to copy this. And my next image of the second one of the same group would be named the same thing, except it would be 2.2, assignment 2.1, number 2, and on and on and on, like that. Does that make sense? There is. So it's just a way to tag what it is. So that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to simply put together a folder. So I'm just going to do a brand new empty folder in here. Name the folder using this same naming convention. So again, it would be Engelhard, E-N-G-E-L-H-A-R-D underscore Verser 2.1. And then put all 4 of your files into that. So again, you don't have to name your files. So it would be these 2 plus the next 2, and all 4 of these would go into that assignment 2.1. And then you just turn in the folder. Does that make sense? Okay, so then to turn this in, you actually go to our server, connect to the server, navigate to class projects, Engelhard, that's for this class, and then you're going to throw them in the Dropbox right here. Now, once you throw this in the Dropbox, you can't see inside. The only person who gets to see inside the Dropbox is me. So typically what I do is at the end of the class, I will actually show you what I have inside the Dropbox, and you can see. But in this case, I would, again, you don't. You can use the VPN if you need to log in from your house. Yeah, hold that thought. No, because I'm going to do it one at a time. And so let me get him connected to the server, and then I'll show you how to do it. All right, so yeah, to connect to the server, you're on Macintosh, right? Yep, go to your Finder, go to the Go menu, come down to Connect to Server. And did you save this server address by any chance? Just click on it and then hit connect. It's going to ask for your username and password. It's exactly what you use to log into any of the machines here. It could be Windows. You can do either one of these. So this actually is Windows. So you can log out of this. So click on that and go down. Maybe you'll right click, hold on, control click. There you go. These are dual boot. They run both. Ian, did you get there?
Yeah.
And could you find the class projects folder?
Yeah. Go into your main example.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So the renaming stuff I just showed you. So in the renaming part, you either want to create a folder that has your last name underscore first name and then the assignment number. In this case, it was for assignment 2.1, and then simply throw your 4 files into that. Or you can individually name those 4 files with your last name underscore first name underscore 2.1 and then the image number after that. Since there are 4 images, you'd have assignment 2.1, point 1, point 2, point 3, and point 4. Does that make sense? And that's what you submit in the Dropbox. Yes. Yes. That's what most people do. It's fine either way. I've quit making sure that people realize, because I think you realize that you aren't going to have a color checker in every image that you make for the rest of your life. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I can see whether you've done the work on either the one that has the card in it or the one that doesn't. Or both. Are there any other questions about this part? Okay, I'm going to pause this recording right now. All right, so the last part of our color, so we're going to just finish up the whole color management part of this. We're almost done. So what we simply created now was the monitor profile that takes this unambiguous color out of this mathematical working space and removes the device dependence that this monitor introduced. So again, any derivation from standard that this monitor is showing, this profile makes that correction. So now we have unambiguous color that has come into our working space, unambiguous color that actually leaves it, and then because of this monitor profile, we are actually seeing unambiguous color on the monitor. Then finally, later on in the semester, we will do the same process for profiling different printers with different papers here to achieve a truly unambiguous, device-independent workflow. Okay, last thing that we need to talk about right here is this is a chromaticity diagram. This is supposed to be a diagram that shows you the scope of human vision relative to spectral data. So if you take the electromagnetic spectrum, there's a part of it, I mean, there's a whole range of things that happen in the electromagnetic spectrum. That's where you have X-rays and gamma rays, but you also have infrared waves. You've also got radio waves. You've got all of that exists along this spectrum. But in a very small area, depending on wavelength, you have what we perceive, the things that our eyes can actually see those waves, and we see them as color. And this is supposed to be a representation of that color. And the thing that you'll notice about this is that in looking at this, that there's a huge area of green right in here. That's because our eyes are far more sensitive to green than they are to any other color. But nonetheless, that's basically what you've got going on here. So realize that this is within the limitations of a projector that's showing you this. So this is a representation. This is not really all the color that you can see, that your eyes can see. Does that make sense, everybody, what I'm talking about here? So we're using this for illustration purposes only, to compare things. So if we take a look at this, the one thing that is missing in this is brightness. We don't have any blacks in here. We don't have any whites in here. Again, this is two-dimensional. If we wanted that brightness third dimension in here, this would have to be a three-dimensional model, which is actually the models that you see when you open up that color sync utility and you're playing around with those color spaces. So anyway, that's what this is right here. This is human vision. This is subject to the display. Again, this is not really the range of color, the limit of color that you can see. It's a representation of that. So you have pure color is all at the edges of this. So this is something to remember in all of the work that we're doing here, is that you'll have a neutral center, and the further away you get from the center, the more saturated your color can get. So you can see there's roughly in this area right in here is where we have a neutral color. There's quite a bit of area that I can get to get saturated and more and more saturated greens. The distance to actually saturate in the sort of the blues and these kind of magenta-y purples right here is not anywhere near as saturatable as it is for the greens. And then the reds are also far more saturatable than are the blues and the sort of purples that are in that lower left-hand corner. So neutral's in the very center here. This is a two-dimensional space. Brightness is missing. However, what this does is this allows us to compare what we call the gamuts of different systems. And so what that means is this right here. If you take a look at this, so again, the horseshoe shape in the background here is what human vision can see. This sort of like squiggly line that's in the sort of the middle part right here, that is actually the color that can be reproduced on an Epson 4800 using matte paper. If you take a look then at the first of the triangles, the smallest of the triangles here, that's the space of sRGB. And the reason this matters to us is that this allows us to see the difference between what's going on with an sRGB space and the color printer Epson 4800 on matte paper. So you can see that there's areas that the printer can print that are outside of what sRGB can show you. This area right in here, this is outside of the sRGB color space. All of this right in here, it's common to both of them. You can see it in sRGB, it exists in there, and you can print it. But this stuff right out here, you cannot. This is actually outside. You can see it, because again, most monitors can show you sRGB, but you can't, I'm sorry, you can print this, but you can't see it if you're using a monitor that shows sRGB. Does that make sense what I'm showing you here?
Why are we using a baby RGB instead of
I'm getting right there. So then the next bigger the triangle is Adobe RGB. So in Adobe RGB, you can see all of the colors that are able, the printer, except for this one little area up here in the yellows, there's an area up in here that the printer can print that you cannot see in Adobe RGB. Does that make sense? But the vast majority of it you can actually see. All of sRGB is inside of this Adobe RGB space. So if you can see Adobe RGB, if you're in Adobe RGB, you can see everything that's in sRGB. But the reverse does not hold true. If you're in sRGB, you can't see stuff that's in Adobe RGB. Make sense? And again, what we're talking about here is saturation. Again, the neutral area in the middle is common to everybody. You can see it no matter what. But as stuff gets more and more saturated, it becomes more and more difficult. You need higher end monitors to actually see. And then finally, you've got the big boy here, ProPhoto RGB, that's sitting out here. Anybody see any problems with ProPhoto RGB? I'm sorry, what? Absolutely. There's color that exists in ProPhoto RGB that your eyes can't see. And there's nothing stopping you from using the math of Photoshop to push your color all the way out here and you can't see it anymore. However, it gets worse. There's no monitor in the world that can show you this. The best monitors in the world right now are lucky if they can show you Adobe RGB. So to your question, nobody can see this. But that doesn't stop you, the software is capable of pushing color out there. Does this make sense, everybody, what's going on? Okay. So it's the reason that these diagrams exist. So gamma refers to the colors that are contained within any one of these outlines. Colors that are inside the outline are colors that are not inside the outline are out of gamut. So for instance, if I've got this color right in here, this green that's right in here in Adobe RGB, but I want to print it on that 4800 printer, this color up here is not inside that space. So I've got to do something about that. I can't just throw that color away. Make sense? Okay. Neutral gray are colors neutral gray and the color nearby are inside all of it. So again, this very center right area in here, everything can show it. The printer can print it. Every monitor in the world can show this. So it's just when you start moving out and getting greater and greater saturation that printers start to lose the ability to print something that saturation, and monitors start losing the ability to show you that deep of a saturation. And that's exactly what that says. So the thing to remember in all of this is that out of gamut color is a saturation issue. That's what this is all about. So this is a more pared down version of it. If we take a look at the cyan dotted line here, that again, the cyan dotted line would be what they call process printing. So this would be a CMYK printer. So the printing press that would do like a magazine. The red line that's around here is an RGB monitor, and it's actually closer to sRGB, but I got bad news for you guys. Most of the laptops, if not all of your laptops, the very best it can show you is sRGB. If you're serious about your retouching and doing color work, you need to get an external monitor, a good one, and one that can actually show you Adobe RGB. There are people who will argue against this. I don't. It's just that simple. If you can't see it on your monitor, it doesn't exist. And then the outside horseshoe thing is human vision. And so what we're talking about here is that if we've got a color right here, C2, it exists, your monitor can actually show you C2 up here, but your printer can't do it. The best your printer can do is C1 right here. This is what's just inside the range of what your printer can print. Does that make sense, what's going on here? So the challenge in this becomes, I've got information that's sitting up here at C2. How do I get it moved down into this color space so that I can actually print it? Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on here? What my challenge is? All right. So C1 is as green as the printer can print. C2 is out of gamut for the printer, but it's not out of gamut for the monitor. The distance between these two represents image detail. If you have two different saturations, they actually have there's distance between them, but they're separate. This represents detail. If I take C2 and make it C1, then the difference between those two is erased, and I've lost detail. Does that make sense, everybody, what we're talking about here? The difference in saturation and tone represents detail. If I've got two colors that are radically different from one another, and you see them next to one another, you can say, oh yeah, I see the difference between that two. That's detail. If I make them the same color and they're touching each other, there is no detail there anymore. It is just gone. It becomes just a field of color. Does that make sense, everybody? Who am I losing here? No, we get to control it, and you guys have been controlling it all along, and you don't know what the fuck you're doing. And that's what this whole part of this lecture is about, because I'm tired of that part. So anyway, profiles can handle this mismatching, but the way we adjust profiles has an impact on how this transition is actually made. So rendering intents are the thing that handle all of this. So this is the last part. There's 4 slides left of this lecture, guys, and this is it. And this is it for all of our color. So if we take a look at this now, to just give you an idea of this illustration right here, the big circle that's on the outside is going to be our RGB gamut. So it's basically a monitor. And then the small circle that's on the inside is a CMYK gamut, so a printer. Does that make sense what's going on here? So what we've got is the in-gamut colors. So 1, 2, and 3 are common to both of these. You can see it on your monitor and you can print it with no problem at all. But 4, 5, and 6 are out of gamut. They are in gamut for my RGB color. I can see it, but they're out of my gamut. My printer cannot print these. So, and again, the difference in 4, 5, and 6, this represents detail. They are different saturations. They're the same color. They could be the same brightness, don't have to be, but nonetheless, this is the saturation difference. So they are distinctly different colors. That represents detail. So, does this illustration make sense, everybody, what we're doing here? So, the first thing that you could do would simply be a saturation pull. And so what happens in this is that in this situation, so you have 4 rendering intents. Most of you guys are familiar with perceptual and relative colorimetric, correct? Does anybody in this room have no idea what I'm talking about? Okay, so when you guys print, you don't pick a rendering intent? So you keep it as perceptual for all of it, right? Which is what you've been told, but that's wrong. That's horribly bad advice to get. That's some lazy fucking ass teacher telling you, oh, just do it perceptual and you'll all be fine. It doesn't work like that. So anyway, we'll talk about what this is. But if you print out of Photoshop or Lightroom, either one, there is this place for you to pick the rendering intent for you to use for this. And you guys either ignore it or you, again, take the advice of somebody who has no idea what they're talking about and just says, oh, dumbly, blindly set it to perceptual. So at any rate, I'm going to start with all 4 of them. We're going to talk about them briefly, and then we'll actually look at the difference and then move on. So in this first setup, you can do, it's a saturation change. And what happens in the saturation change is that 4, 5, and 6 are all brought out of gamut right to the edge of where the printer can print them. So the problem with this is that 4, 5, and 6 become exactly the same color. So you've lost detail. But this isn't really designed, this rendering intent is really not designed to maintain detail. It's designed to give you the greatest difference in colors by increasing the saturation of everybody. So you can see 4, 5, and 6 are brought just in, but they are right on the edge of the most saturated that the printer can print. But then you'll take a look here. 1, 2, and 3 are also pushed out, so it increases their saturation as well. So all of the colors basically bastardized, but everything is made more saturation, greater saturation. So this is what, for people who do this kind of stuff, you guys know the, if you look at the back of the, you guys know what a newspaper is anymore? You know, that like big sheet of paper, yeah. Anyway, if you take a look, it is not just of that, but if you take a look on the back page of that for the weather maps, they always have, you know, weather maps of the United States, and they always have, they're color coded, like, okay, you know, this is going to be the, you know, they have Southern California is going to be warmer in the 70s, so it's like kind of a yellowy orange, and then, you know, Chicago is going to be bitterly cold, so it's kind of cyanic blue, whatever, and they color code the map, right? It doesn't matter what the colors are to you, the only thing that matters is being able to distinguish the difference in the colors. So this is the mapping that they would use because it increases the saturation of everything, and in hopes of doing that, you would actually see more of a distinction between the really, you know, the orangish red that's really close to the red. Does that sort of make sense? Again, nobody in photo uses this, but this exists. The next one is perceptual, the one that everybody has been told to use. What happens in perceptual is this. 4, 5, and 6 that are out of gamut are brought into gamut. Now 6 is the furthest that's out of gamut, so it gets brought in right to the very edge of something that can be printed. However, 4 and 5 maintain their respective distance from 6. So what happens is, it's going to change these colors because it has to bring them into gamut. But it's going to maintain the difference in 4, 5, and 6. So you can see 6 is here, 5 is here, 4 is here. It maintains the separation between the two of them, which preserves detail. However, in order to preserve the relationship of all color, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's got to move 1, 2, and 3 also closer into less saturation, closer into the neutral gray part in the middle. But what happens is that the whole scale shifts, and the relationship between those numbers is maintained. So human eyes are really adaptive, and we adapt to this. We say, okay, I don't see that as a color mismatch. However, and it's also maintaining the maximum amount of detail in this, because they're all still uniquely separate. But the downside of this is that every single color in your image is changed, every single one. The ones that are out of gamut were changed, the ones that are in gamut are changed. So all of your color is shifted when you use perceptual. Again, human eyes are very forgiving about this stuff. It maintains the maximum amount of detail, but all of the colors are different. So if you are shooting for Coca-Cola, they have a trademark red Coca-Cola. That red is changed. It's no longer going to be that trademark Coca-Cola red. That's a problem. We're going to get there. So in the case of perceptual, no. In the case of perceptual, all the detail is maintained because the divisions and all of those colors are separate. If you go back to the saturation, this is detail that's lost. But that's, again, not the one that we're going to work with. That's not one you would use. So in colorimetric, this is what happens in this. So in colorimetric, and again, there's two versions of this. There's relative and absolute. But in this case, what they do is they take 4, 5, and 6, and they bring them right here to the edge to be printed. But then 1, 2, and 3 don't move. They maintain theirs. So 1, 2, and 3 keep their original color. So the color here is not perverted. However, 4, 5, and 6 it is. And 4, 5, and 6 even worse. It's made all the same color. So any detail that existed in here is lost. Make sense to everyone? So then there's two versions, there's two flavors of relative and absolute. And this goes through the difference here, but I'm just going to sort of tell you really quickly what the difference is. In relative colorimetric, what they do is they actually take the white point of your image and they map it to the white point of your piece of paper or whatever it is you're going to print on. And you don't get any color casting. What absolute does is absolute takes the white point of your image and maps it to an adjusted version, a corrected version for your print. So the easiest way I can explain this is this. Let's say that you have, you've scanned an old-time wanted poster from the Wild West, and it's sort of a yellowish, kind of a dingy yellow piece of paper, right? In relative colorimetric, what will happen is when you print that thing out, it will actually print and it will look just like the poster. You'll have, if your poster doesn't cover the whole piece of paper, you'll still have white edges around your piece of paper, and then you'll have this yellowish antique paper representation on it. If you use absolute, what it does is that it will actually print the piece of paper to be that same yellow dingy color, and then put the yellow dingy color on top of the yellow dingy paper that you created. So you get hit twice. It's a double hit, so that you end up with the poster that you look at is super yellow and dirty and dingy. Again, absolute is used for people who are in the graphics industry, not for people who do photography. So the real question that you come down to in photography when you're trying to pick your rendering intent is my color, do I have a lot of stuff that's out of gamut that I need to maintain detail, or do I have a lot of stuff that's not out of gamut? Then you know which one to pick, right? Okay, everybody in Photoshop, has everybody opened Photoshop? Has everybody got the red car in Photoshop? Say what? So the red car is in session number 1. Just double click on that. It's called redcar.psd. Try a different computer. Try and move over to that one. It's got to be that. Or this one right here. And if not, I will get you logged in on that under me, and you can wreak havoc in my little partition. Okay, So in Photoshop, you can actually do what they call soft proofing. You can actually say, I want you to show me this profile, this gamut mismatching, if you will. So if you come up to the view menu and you come down in your very top part right here, you'll see there's a proof setup, a proof colors, and a gamut warning. If you click on the gamut warning, you will actually see this on your car. It should be bright green like this because we changed the color that we used for gamut mapping. So who in this room has got a middle gray in these same areas now instead of this bright green? Anyone? Okay, so if you did that, go up to your Photoshop menu, down to Preferences. If you're on Windows, it's the Edit menu all the way down to Preferences, but on a Mac, Photoshop, Preferences, and come down to Transparency and Gamut. Click on the Gamut Warning Color dialog box to open it up. Type in 0 for your red, 255 for green, and 0 for blue, and it'll give you this shockingly bright pure green, and say OK to that, and then close this up, and you should have green on your car. So do you have the complete list of assignments? Don't worry. So did you copy the entire folder of assignments to me? It probably does, because it's also not a computer. So you don't have to read those things. So click on this little square right here. And put in your Okay, so back to this. So what this is set up to show you right now is, we've already set this up in our color preferences. This is showing you the gamut of a CMYK printer, specifically a swapped CMYK printer, because we set that as our CMYK color space. However, we can change this. It doesn't need to be this. Most of you guys are not printing on CMYK printers. Most of you guys are printing on those inkjet printers that are in there, and that is a completely different animal. CMYK printer has the smallest gamut of all color printers. The inkjet printers have considerably more, primarily because they use better paper and really good ink. So anyway, we can simulate that. So if you come up to your view menu and you come down to proof setup and come over, you can actually see, proof setup, that it's set to your working CMYK. This is by default. But you can say, I want to change that. I want to know what it's like to print on that Epson, or the Canon printers that are out in the studio. So if you click on custom, it'll actually open up, and when it opens up here for this custom part, you can click on this bottom drop down device to simulate. Again, they call this soft proofing because these are now going to show you a simulation of the way this will look on your screen. So how will the printer actually print this out, and it'll give you a version on your screen. If you click on the drop down menu, you can actually come down and you will see that there's a ton of printer profiles in here. You may not have the same ones that I have depending on what you've loaded onto your computer. So some of these right here, the machines that are actually in the studio, and that are here, the colleges ones, they probably have the Canon software stuff installed on them. But if you've never installed a Canon driver, you won't have these profiles. I do have these profiles. So I'm going to come down to, this is a Canon Pro 1000. Those are the ones that are out there. And I'm going to actually put this on a glossy paper. So I'm going to change the output printer of this. So I'm going to click the glossy printer and I'm going to say okay to that. And now look at what is out of gamut. It is these very small little color dots in here. So if you were printing this to a CMYK printer, you would definitely want to, you would have a lot of out of gamut color. The very first one we were looking at, you would want to use perceptual because you have so much out of gamut color. You want to bring that in. You don't care that you're going to change the color of this red car. You want to bring that in though so that you maintain all the detail, because otherwise you're going to have these big blocks of just single color on your car. But now when I've gone to a better printer that's got a larger gamut, I don't need to use this. I can use relative colorimetric, which will mean every single color in here, other than the amounts that are under these little red parts under the green parts right here, everything else is going to remain true to that color. So if this color was a registered trademark color for Corvette, it would print that way. It would print with that color. Does this make sense, what I'm talking about here? So the decision is yours. I reject the people that just say, oh, perceptual, use it all the time. Bullshit. Yes. The only two you're ever going to use for photography, unless you want some really weird shit. And that might be your new art thing right there, right? I use absolute colorimetric on everything. Fucks my files up, but it looks like art. And relative colorimetric, those are the only two that you use. Perceptual, if you've got a lot of out of gamut color. Relative colorimetric if you don't. And a lot of you guys shooting don't have a lot of out of gamut color. Again, unless you're using those really hyper saturated files, you just don't have that kind of color. It doesn't really change the profiles, because again, what's happening is that you've got color information in your file and you're trying to send that to a printer and say print this. So all of that transition happens in the printer software. It's not in the OS hardware at all. So when you go to the, you go print and you come down and it shows you a little print box, and all of that is software that's been written by the printer manufacturers. It's not Apple software. Is screwed up, yeah. But I think we've troubleshot most of that stuff, so it shouldn't be as bad as it's been in the past. I spent weeks trying to fix all that and giving you not only basically to also give you the settings that you need, the media settings for when you go to print for a given profile, all of that kind of stuff. So there's a million things you have to set to make your printing correct. And if you follow the new worksheet on all of that, it'll give you all the information. And there's also a database of all the media file settings that you use for everything, or any printer and paper combination that I could come up with. So anyway, if we're going to print this now, you would come up to the print menu, down to print. This is where you set your rendering intent, is right here. So if you guys have never visited this little dialog box, this is where it would be. And given that I would actually be printing this out now to that on a glossy paper, then I would use relative colorimetric. I'm going to cancel out of this really quickly and show you one other thing really fast. I'm going to change this one more time. So up to the view menu, down to setup, over again to custom. I'm going to change this now to a matte paper instead of a glossy paper. So we'll do it on a premium matte paper and say okay to that. Even less out of gamut color. I'm going to try one more. And we'll go to, see what it looks like on canvas. What rendering intent would you think to use if you're printing this onto a piece of canvas? Perceptual, certainly. Otherwise, this is all going to block up as all single color. So again, the information is there for you to make it. You got in. Other questions about this? So, no. So go ahead and say OK to whatever you have set there. So go back up to your view menu and come down. The check mark right next to gamut warning. Yeah. Did it check? Yeah. Oh, okay. Are we good on this part? Okay. When you install the driver, it installs all the profiles for you. But I have all the profiles separate. If you want to just get a hold of the profiles, so, shoot me an email. I will post my entire collection of profiles on our Canvas site. Okay. Last thing I don't want to do, everybody whip out their Wacom tablet. Hopefully you brought yours. If you didn't bring it, just follow along on the video. But we're going to actually set up our Wacom tablets now. So they are USB wired. If you brought your own, if you bought one, so I know like Patrick has got a different version here. You may not have the correct software to actually run this. So to get to the software that you need, if you go to, this is for the tablets that you get from the school, these small ones right here. Again, the software, there's 1,000 different tablets and there's 1,000 different versions of software. If you have your own tablet or you have something that's not the ones that you checked out from the school, look on the very back of it and it will actually give you the model number. So you can see this is an Intuos CL4100, but you may have another version, a different size, a different version, blah, blah, blah. If you have your own tablet that you want to use, that's fine. The software that I'm giving you to actually run the ones that you can check out may work for another tablet, they may not. If it doesn't work, again, look at the model number on the back, go to Wacom's website. It's going to ask you to enter the model number that you've got. That's where you find it. Enter that model number and it will give you the software to actually download depending on your version of OS. So different versions of Mac OS require different drivers, different versions of Windows. Windows is a little less complicated, as in most things. Yes?
Yes, I can adapt it from USB to USB because the media center
They don't, but I do. That's what you're looking for, right? Yeah. Okay. All right, so plug your tablet in. If you have not installed the software on your computer yet, I've given you the software for both Windows and for Mac. So if you go to, let me see where it is. Yep. If you go to session number 1, you will see at the bottom there are 2 Wacom tablet installers. The 6.4.3-1.exe is the driver software install for Windows, and the Wacom tablet 6.4.3.2-DMG is the one for Macintosh. So if you haven't installed the software for this, you need to go ahead and run it right now. Does anybody have to run the software, or are we good to move on? Go ahead and run it now, though. I'll wait. Yeah. To run the software, the tablet does not need to be plugged in. It could be, but oh, you don't have an adapter either? What do you need? You need USB to what? To USB-C?
that's something that
No. Yeah, I only had 2 of those and they're both out.
software do you run? The DXD or the DMG?
If you're on Macintosh, it's DMG.
So USB-C to USB, right?
Yes, yeah. Oh, great. Make sure you get this back to him. No, this is actually the opposite.
What's the one right here? The number?
Oh, it is. Yeah, could they make this any more difficult to
I
read?
know, I was gonna say, because I think mine's the same, but I can't really tell from the phone.
Yeah, I can tell you right now. It's the CL41. Yeah, this is the software that you need for that one is actually on your computer. It's the stuff that I've downloaded. It's this what?
It says it isn't a
Oh, you don't need to install it. It's already installed on these. So just hit cancel, and you can hit cancel over there. It's already installed. If you're on the school's computers, it's already installed. Yes.
I can find it around that.
Then no, you don't need to change a thing. Yeah, if you've already got one and it's working, you don't need to change anything. You don't need to update anything. So is this working for the people who are installing? I'm sorry, what? All right, did the rest of you guys get this on? Are we good? Okay, so for the Windows people, you've got to go to your, I'm fairly certain it's your device manager is where you'll find the Wacom adjustment panel. For the people who are on Macintosh, come up to your Apple menu, down to System Preferences. If you're on a newer version of Mac, it's called System Settings. Click on this and a window dialog box will open up. And now in my case, I've got a Wacom tablet icon down at the very bottom of this screen that opens up. For the people who are on the newer version of Macintosh where it says settings, I think you have a whole column on the on the left-hand side. You need to scroll down that left-hand side until you find Wacom tablet. Say what? Right, so you're on Macintosh, right? Yeah, so go up to the Apple menu and come down to System Settings. And that's what you're looking for. So it's on that side, I'm pretty sure. Keep scrolling down. Just tell me if you found Wacom anywhere in there. Yes? Yeah. Liam got this very same thing. I don't think you need to run either one. You can do the setup wizard. I don't think you need to do either one. It's all about the center, and we're looking at this, the controls in this in a different place. Yeah. So anyway, I'm going to click on my Wacom tablet, and this will actually open up, and this is where you can control how this tablet actually works. So most of you are relatively new to graphics tablets. So I'm strongly going to suggest that you keep the majority of your stuff at its default settings. And somebody tell me where my pen is. Oh, thank you. Okay, so when you get this, when you open up the Wacom tablet, so have you guys got the Wacom tablet preferences open? Or settings open? Okay, at the very top, you can actually, you should have an all other, basically it's the software, or you'll have nothing in here. You can actually set your tablet up to work differently in different programs. Again, if you are brand new to this, I suggest you do not do that. You want whatever you do in one program to be the exact same as another program. So, but this would allow you, if you wish to actually specifically change certain settings for certain software. And so to add a program to this, you simply click on the plus button. It'll allow you to navigate to your application folder. You can click on something, bring it in here, click on it, and then actually make the adjustments for that one given program, and then click on a different program to do a different set of adjustments for that. But in our case, I'm going to leave this on all others. I'm not going to do custom settings for programs. So then when you look down, there's a set of tabs that run across the top. There's your tablet, a pen, mapping, and on-screen controls. Tablet, go ahead and select the tablet to actually have that. Those are where we'll do the adjustments to begin with. In the tablet part, there are a set of modifiers. So depending on the tablet that you have, on my tablet, the modifiers are 4 large buttons that sit at the very top. This describes what those buttons actually do, and you can change them. So if, for instance, if you look at the top, or the button that's on the far left on my tablet, it's set up to when I click on it, it's going to give me a modifier key. And the key would be, again, this modifier. You can change this and say, well, I don't want it to do that. I want it to be a right click, or I want it to be a double click. I want it to launch something. You can change the behavior of all of these buttons. I strongly suggest you leave them as they are. Don't change them now. Just know that you can at some point. Then as we come down, we don't need to, I don't have a wireless tablet going on here, so I'm going to go to my next tab over to the pen tab. If you click on that, this allows you to adjust your stylus. If you take a look at your stylus, you'll notice that there's a pointy end and a non-pointy end. This is supposed to be just like a regular pen or a pencil would be. So the pointy end is the stylus, that is the positive end. That's what you would actually use on your tablet when you want to make marks. The other end is typically set up as an eraser end, so you can turn this over and actually use it to do, again, opposite of what the stylus end of it will do. All of this is customizable. You'll also notice that there is a rocker switch that's close to the stylus end of it. It's got a small button in the front and a larger button in the back. Those are also configurable as different modifiers or clicks. So you can see that the way it's set up right now is that the larger button in the sort of towards the eraser end is set up to be a right click, and then the smaller button in the front is set up to be a scroll. You can change these to be anything you want. Again, I would suggest if you're new to this, you leave it at its defaults. Tip feel, if you actually come over on your tablet right now and actually put pressure on your tablet, you can see how much pressure it takes to get all the way over. So again, you can use pressure to control things like size of brush. You can use it to control flow, to control opacity. You can control it to do all of those things here. This is something that you want to be familiar and comfortable with how you feel. How hard do you have to press to get it to be a full press? If you grab that adjustment slider for the tip feel and drag it all the way over to soft, now when you barely touch your tablet, it will go all the way over really quickly. If you drag the tip feel all the way over to firm, you actually have to press considerably harder to get a full, what would be considered 100% pressure on your tablet. Again, I would suggest you leave it in the middle until you're used to working with these things. In terms of the click distance on this, what click distance really is how fast between 1 click and 2 clicks on your computer are considered a double click and that will launch something. So you could go to a JPEG or an image file or a RAW file on your computer, and working with a mouse or working with a trackpad or any of that kind of stuff, if you double click on it really fastly, it launches. But there's nothing that stops you from clicking once on it, pausing, clicking a second time. It will not launch. It's just selecting it a second time. That's what click distance is here. It's how fast do you need to tap this twice in a row to be considered a double click. Again, I would suggest you leave it at its default. There's no real reason to change this part. The next part over is mapping. If you click on this part actually matters a lot, especially to Alex, somebody like you who's working with multiple screens. So if you're working with multiple screens, you'll actually see 2 screens will pop up onto this. So what this is doing is it's saying, what area on my tablet am I going to map to my screen? I'm going to actually go back to the default on mine because mine is set differently. I use a different version because of the way I don't like part of the way this tablet works. But at its default, what you have is you'll see that there's a mode for either a pen or a mouse. There are Wacom tablets that have dedicated mice for it. These tablets don't, so you're never going to actually have to change the adjustment for the mouse. But for the full screen part, again, in the full tablet area, by default, it does the entirety of your screen, the entirety of your tablet maps up to the entirety of your screen. So if you come up to the upper left-hand corner of your tablet, you should be in the upper left-hand part of the screen. The upper right-hand part should be in the upper right. The lower left or right-hand part should be all the way down, and your lower left as well. But you'll notice when you get down to that, at least if you're using the school's tablets, when you get down to that lower part right here, for me, I hate the way this feels because my hand is part on the tablet and part off the tablet. And it's really hard to get and do precise stuff down there. So I actually changed the mapping of my tablet area. So if you click on your tablet area and say portion instead, this will allow you to control what part of your tablet is considered live that then maps up to your screen. So you can see on mine, I actually take the lower part of my tablet and instead of having it all the way down, which would be full tablet, I bring it up. And so what this does is that basically forgets the bottom 1 inch of my tablet. And that way I can keep my hand on the bottom of my tablet, but still get down to that lower left hand and the lower right hand corners. This is just personal preference for me, guys. You don't have to do any of this, but this is how I set mine up, and go ahead and say okay to that. If you have dual screen on this, you're actually allowed to map your tablets to go to span all dual screens, all of it, or only part of it. You'll see when you do that, you'll click on the full screen drop down, and then here you would have either portion of a single monitor or monitor 1 or monitor 2, and you can control it that way. Are there any questions about any of this? Shoot.
Whenever I touch the thing, I have like a security setting.
So if you get a security setting that comes up, I don't know that they're going to let us change this in here, but we don't really need to do this. But anyway, come up to the Apple menu, and come down to System Preferences. Where should it System Preferences? Yeah, so come out of that, click on all three guys right here, and then go down to Security and Privacy. And then click on this, and if it's allowed you to unlock this. No, and then so you have to hit cancel. But don't worry about this because it looks like your tablet's working on this, isn't it? And does it register? We'll get through this. Yes.
I'm just curious, with screen area, what's the difference?
So again, a lot of people when they're actually doing work like this in Photoshop, a lot of people will dedicate one screen to something completely different than Photoshop. And so you don't want your tablet actually going over and spending time in your browser or whatever else you've got going on in the other screen. So you can restrict it to only work on that area. You could also restrict it even more if there was a reason to do it. I don't think it really is, but that would be a perfect example of using these controls. Okay, is everybody good on this part? Okay, I think now's be a good time for a break. I got 2:41. If you can be back at 2:51, a hard 10, please. Okay, if you've done all of this work with the car, you don't want to be seeing this on all of your images. So come back up to Proof Setup. So again, up to the View menu to Proof Setup and come down to, we're just going to go back to our defaults, Working CMYK. Again, that CMYK is a swap-coded version of it. That got set up if you look at your Edit menu all the way down to Color Settings. When we set this to North American Prepress 2, this US web-coded swap version 2, we also selected. That's what this color is talking about right here. In the View menu right down here in your Proof Setup, this Working CMYK. that is the working CMYK. That's where this all comes from. You-
What were the color settings? Sorry.
View menu. Oh, color settings. Edit menu. Down to the bottom. Color settings. It should be set to North American Prepress 2. You should have Adobe RGB as your RGB color space, and this US web coded swap version 2 is your CMYK color space. Yeah, it's the one by default, so just so that you don't get confused. And then come down and uncheck the gamut warning, and it will go away. And you can close the file up. We're not going to work with that guy right now. Okie dokie. We're going to deal with selection tools now. Today is going to be all about making selections. So this is my take on selections. If it's the most difficult thing to do in Photoshop, but it's the challenge. If you can make the perfect selection, you can do anything. You can do deep fakes. You can do all. I mean, you can do pretty much anything. But it's the quality of your selection is what really matters here. So we're going to go through selection strategies to death today, and that's going to start with the selection tools. I'm going to go pretty quickly through those guys because I want to spend time actually working on making really, really difficult selections. I know a couple of people in here are fashion people, but how many people do you struggle with selecting hair? It's the biggest challenge. So that's what we're going to start with. That's where we'll ultimately wind up at the end of the day today. And then your homework will be all about building selections. Okay, so to start with, we're just going to make a synthetic file. So if you hit Command N in Photoshop, it will bring up the new dialog. If you set yours to use the legacy version of dialog box, that's what I've got going on here. If you have some other kind of whatever, I don't care how you get to this new file, but basically I'm just creating a synthetic, just a fake file. I'm not opening an image. I'm just going to create a blank thing to work with right here. In the drop-down menu that opens up, I can change my width and height, the units that I use from pixels to inches. And then I'm going to actually make mine 10 inches wide. This part doesn't really matter too much, but 8 inches tall, and then a resolution of 300 pixels per inch. Then RGB color is what it'll be. White is going to be my background. In terms of my color profile, I'm going to change my color profile just to be an Adobe RGB something. And then square pixels is the pixel ratio here, and just say OK to that. And you should have ended up with a screen, something that looks like this. If you double click on the hand, it will actually go as big as it can possibly go, but not hide any of your palettes or show underneath anything as well. And then, hang on 1 second. Yeah, okay. I need to change something right here. Okay. So the selection tools. If you come over to your toolbar on the far left-hand side, the small skinny thing that runs on the far left-hand side, the tool at the very top is the Move tool. The easiest way to get to that is use the V key. We don't have anything to move right now though, so we don't care about that. The next tool down is the beginning of the selection group. So if you click on the thing that looks like a square marching ants, click on the lower right-hand corner, you'll get a flyout menu that shows you 4 different options. You can do the rectangular marquee tool, the elliptical marquee tool, the single row, or the single column. We're going to start with the very top one, the rectangular marquee tool. When you do any change of tools, you need to immediately look at the options bar up at the top. So the options bar, take a look at my screen, it's this thing that runs right along the top here. This changes depending on the tool that you're using, so you can control certain things in your tool. Right now I need to make sure that you have a feather of 0 and a style of normal. And then simply come out onto your screen. I'm going to click on the top left and drag to the lower right. That's just how I make my selections. If you're left-handed, you can click and do the opposite. But what you'll notice is that every time you click and drag something out, what happens is that it gets rid of the original selection and it makes a brand new one. And that's the way most, not all, but that's the way most selection tools work. So everybody, you guys should know all of this. This is the most elemental of all of Photoshop parts. If you want to add to a selection, you hold down the Shift key and you'll notice that that little cursor then no longer is just a cross. It's actually a cross with another little cross underneath it. That little cross underneath it is a plus. You can click and drag this out now, and you can actually add to your selections to make really complex things. If instead you hold down the Option key, you'll notice that instead of that little plus underneath the X, you actually get a minus now. This is how you subtract areas. And these modifier keys work for pretty much everything. So all the selection tools, if you hold down Shift, you add. If you hold down Option, you subtract. And if you don't hold down anything, it gets rid of the original selection and changes to a new one. If you hover inside the middle of your selection, you can actually get a tool to move it around. So once your selection is made, bring your cursor up onto the inside. It'll give you a little white arrow kind of thing with little marching ants around it. This allows you to actually move your selections around. You can transform your selections. Now, most of you guys know transform from transforming images. If you don't worry about it. That doesn't matter. We will get to transforming images later. But you would think that to do a transform of selection, you would come up to the Edit menu down to Transform. That is not true. This is for transforming pixel elements. This is not a pixel element. This is a selection. So to transform it, you use the Select menu. So most of you are not familiar with too much of the Select menu, but it's pretty much in the middle at the very top. If you come down to your Select menu, you can see down almost at the bottom where it says Transform Selection. And then you will see that you now get control points on your selection, and you can actually modify it. And you'll still have the marching ants. If you want to commit the selection, transform, again, if you go up to the options bar, your options bar right now is a transform option, not a selection option. So you would simply click on the check mark, and you now have a new set of marching ants, and your options tool, your options bar has gone back to the select menu. If we do transform again of the selection up to the select menu down to transform selection, and then you change, transform selection, you get the marching, you get the control handles. However, the one to notice is the one up in your options bar for transform. I always think it looks like a windshield wiper thing. It's right next to the word that says bicubic. It looks, I don't know. It's look at my own screen. It's this thing right here. If you click on this, this will actually give you additional points to allow you to transform your selection. And now you can click on any of these points and actually do brazier curve changes to the selection that's actually going. This can allow you to really fine-tune a selection to fit something exactly, something that is organic in shape, all of that kind of stuff. And once you get this done correctly, you can click on the check mark, and it'll actually then give you that warped transform of that selection. Again, it's this, so up to the select menu, down to transform. It's this little icon right here. Click on this little icon, you get all these points on the inside, and you can move this stuff around, but there's nothing it affects. You're only affecting the outer edge, the marching ants. So this has no anchor point the same way you have for transforming an image. This does not have one of those. You can see it's this little thing up here. This is where you actually would get that anchor point, but we're not doing we're transforming a selection, not an image. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and say okay to that. The shortcut for getting rid of an active selection is Command D. That will get rid of your selection. I'm going to click and drag out another selection here. You can save selections and load them. So I've got my first box right here. I'm just going to call this box. To save this selection, come up to the select menu and come down to save selection. And I'm going to call it box 1. And say okay to that. Command D to deselect. Then you need to look over at your channels palette, and you will see at the very bottom of your channels palette there is what we call an alpha channel right underneath the blue channel called box 1. That is what I just saved. Now, selections and masks are interchangeable. When we saved that selection, we created this mask in this channel. I can load that mask again and I will have my selection back. So to load the selection, to load that mask as a selection, come up to the select menu and down to load selection, and in the drop down channels you will have, we only have one right now because we've only made one, it's called box 1. Go ahead and click OK and it's actually back again. Now for my money that is too laborious to do that every time you want to load a selection. So hit Command D to unload that. This is tricky, but we are going to use this you are going to use this every day for the rest of your life. So it matters that you pay attention right now to see how this works. If you come over to the channels palette and you click on look where my cursor is. It's actually not on the word that says box. It's really in the middle of the area of it. If you click on that, all of a sudden this shows you that channel and allows you to edit. You can see that the channel now has been highlighted, and I can edit this thing. I can go in and paint on this. I can blur it. I can do anything I can do to any other image I can do to this part right here. But that's not what I want to do. I wanted to load this thing as a selection. So if that happened to you, go up to the very top, click on the RGB channel. That will select all the RGB ones. If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll notice now that your box 1 is not highlighted and therefore not visible to us. But I want to load this as a selection, and a lot of people will hover over the entire channel, and I'll show you the keyboard shortcut in a second, and use it, but it selects, it not only will load it as a selection, but it will also select a channel. You don't want to do that. What you want to do is hover over the thumbnail. So now I'm hovering over the thumbnail, not the channel itself, but the thumbnail, and then hold down your Command key. It'll be your Control key in Windows, and you'll notice that your hand cursor has now turned into a hand with a little set of marching ants. If you click on that, it loads this as a selection. This doesn't only happen in channels. This happens in layers. It happens in paths. It happens all over Photoshop. Hovering over the thumbnail and command clicking will load whatever you've got going on it as a selection. So this is an easier, faster way to load this stuff, and it's how I'm going to suggest that you actually do it. Command D to undo that selection, and I want you to create a brand new selection now, and I want you to do a different shape, something that will intersect the one that you've already made. So I'm just going to do a bigger box that's sitting over here down a little bit lower. I'm going to save this selection up to the select menu, down to save selection, and I'm going to call it box 2. And say OK to that. Then I'm going to hit Command D to deselect, and now look at the bottom of your layers palette, and you will see that you've now got another alpha channel down here called box 2. If you hover over its thumbnail, hold down the Command key and click, it will load this as a selection. If you go up to box 1 and hover over its thumbnail and hold down the Command key and click, it will actually give you that selection. But again, this is that typical select behavior. You lose the original selection when you get the new one. If you want them to interact, you need to use load. So I've got my box number 1, marching ants are already going. If you come up to the select menu down to load selection, in the drop down menu you can select box number 2, and then you have the interaction between them. How do you want this to be? If you leave it at its default where it says new selection, what will happen is that box number 1 will go away and you'll simply get box number 2. That's not going to help us. If you click on the add to selection and say OK, you will see that these two now merge. If you hit Command Z to undo that, and then go back to the select menu down to load selection, and instead of add to selection, say subtract from selection and say OK, you will see that here there was no pixels that were selected because it killed everything in here. So I'm going to load box 1 again. I'm going to go back up to my load selection. In my drop down menu I had box 1 selected and I subtracted it from itself. Instead I'm going to say box 2, subtract from selection, and say OK, and it knocks out that corner. Command Z to undo that. Finally, the last one, up to the select menu, down to load selection, pick box number 2, and then do intersect. And what intersect does is it reveals only things that were common to both. Does this make sense to everybody what's going on here? Okay, Command D to deselect. If you take a look at the top right now here, we're actually going to, let's do this. We are going to add another blank layer. So come over to your layers palette. If you look down at the very bottom of your layers palette, there's a little square with a plus in the middle. If you click on that square with a plus in the middle, it adds an empty blank layer. If you take a look at it by turning off, I want to look just at the layer. It's selected, my layer number 1 is selected, but if I turn off the eyeball for my layer number 2, you'll see that this is filled with a checkerboard. The checkerboard is Photoshop's way of showing you that this is transparent. So there's nothing in this. The checkerboard is strictly indicates transparency. So I'm going to turn on the lower layer underneath it as well, really quickly here. I'm going to click and drag out just another square again, and I take that back. I'm going to hit Command D to deselect that. I'm going to hover over my box number 1, hold down Command and click to load this as a selection, and I'm going to fill this with black. To fill with your foreground and background colors, there are keyboard shortcuts to do them. I use them all the time. Again, I told you guys I'm never going to test you on a keyboard shortcut. I'm just going to give you the ones that I use that'll make your work faster, but if you can't remember it, I'll show you ways to actually do other things. But if you look at your keyboard right now, look at your space bar, you will see that just to the left of your space bar, in the Macintosh world is Command Option, in the Windows world is Control Option, I think. The Command key will always refer to, the one that is closest to your space bar will always refer to your background color. So if you look at the background color, in my case right now it's black and white, my background color is actually underneath the foreground color, but it's also to the right. That is the same positioning as the Command key. The foreground color is the Option key, the key that's right next to it. And this doesn't matter what your background and foreground colors are. So if your background color is cyan and your foreground color is red, these keyboard shortcuts will fill with those colors. Just remember that the background color is always the key that's the modifier that is to the right. The Option key is always the modifier that is to the left, and the color that is to the left. So if I want to fill this active selection with my foreground color, which is black, I hold down Option and hit Delete, and it will fill it with black. If I want to fill it with white now, white is my background color, I hold down Command and hit Delete. In the case of Windows people, it's not Delete, I think it's backspace. Is this working for you guys? Okay, I'm going to fill it with black again, Option Delete, Command D to deselect. Now I'm actually going to go and make another selection here, but this time I'm going to feather it. So I'm going to put in a feathering up in my up in my options tablet, up at the my options bar at the very top. I'm going to. So do you have an active selection going? Is black your foreground color? Hold down Option and hit Delete. So yeah, you've got generative fill actually going on. Generative fill for your face. Click on the little three dots here. Just put it there somewhere. Hold on. And then click on the little three dots. Okay, and so now you've got an active selection going. So black is the foreground color. Hold down Option. And then if you want background color, hold on Command. Right, sure. Okay, so I want you to do a new layer on top of this. In this new layer, I'm actually going to change the feathering of my selection right now. So again, feathering is just how soft your edges are going to be. Put in 20 pixels, so 20px. And then we're going to click and drag out another selection just on top of the one that we've got and fill it with black. So again, black is my foreground color, so Option Delete, Command D to deselect. And you can see I have soft edges. This was because I actually set that feathering to 20 pixels. At 0, I had no softening or feathering at all. At 20 pixels, I've got this much feathering. At 100 pixels, it would be even more so. Does this make sense, everybody, what's going on here? We good about this part? Okay. I'm going to go back to my 0 pixel count, so 0 feathering. But then you've got a style menu, and if you take this style menu, when you leave it at normal, it's all about freeform. So I'm going to throw away both of my layers, both of those layers that are on top. I'm just dragging them to the trash so I can just basically start over again. I'm going to click and drag out, and it's completely freeform. It doesn't really matter. If you hit Command D to deselect that, now this time we're going to actually use modifier keys. So the modifier key I'm going to say is hold down the Shift key and now click. And if you hold down the Shift key, what happens is that it constrains the width and the height to be exactly the same. So you are getting squares. You can get big squares or small squares, but the width and the height are exactly the same. So this is how you create a square. If you hit Command D to deselect that, I need you now to actually have your rulers visible. To get your rulers visible, come up to the View menu and come down to where it says Rulers, almost a third of the way from the bottom up. Make sure that you have a check mark next to your rulers. It will actually then show you a ruler along the top edge of your image and on the left side of your image. If you hover over the ruler and hold down your Control key and click, you will get a drop-down menu that will allow you to put this into any units of measure that you want. I'm going to leave mine in inches, and it doesn't matter for what we're talking about right now, but just so that you know that that's how that part actually functions. However, we can pull guidelines off of this, and these guidelines, they're non-printable, they don't show up in anything, they will stick with your file. If you save your file and open it up 10 years from now, the same guidelines will be in the same spot, but they're non-printing characters, so you don't need to worry about that, and you can hide them anytime you want. But if you hover over the ruler that it's at the very top and you click and drag, it will pull down a guideline, and I want you to pull down something that's sort of in the middle of your image. My guidelines right now are set up to be cyan. If you were working on a cyanic image, you would not be able to see those guidelines, so you would come up to your Photoshop menu, down to Preferences. Again, if you're in Windows, you would go to Edit menu, down to Preferences, come down to Guides and Grids and Slices and open this up. This is where you can change the color of your guide. So I could change it, again, from this cyan to magenta or something else so that you could actually see it, just so that you guys know that that part's there. But I'm working on a white background. I can see it fine. Click on the left-hand ruler now and drag a guideline out that will give you, I'm just looking for a cross here sort of in the middle. So one of the challenges that we have when we're doing guides a lot of times is to actually have it target the center of our selection to be the center of, in this case, I want it to be centered on the intersection of these two guidelines. So if I start at the very top and I click and I drag down, even if I hold down my Shift key, this is not centered on that, and then I can try and juggle it around to get this. It's just a pain in the ass. Don't try and do that. Instead, hover over the intersection of this and hold down your Option key and then click and start to drag, and you will see that no matter what your shape is, whether it's a rectangle or a square, it's all coming out. The center, the origin point is the very center of those two guidelines. If you add the Shift key to that, it will actually be squares that are perfectly centered on those guidelines, and then simply let go. This is how you can center your selections as opposed to trying to move it around and target it. Did that make sense for everyone? Did that work for everyone? Great. Command D to deselect. So that gets us through pretty much, oh, not quite. Then you still got style over on the bottom. So if you click on your style, you can come down. You have two other things that you can actually put into this. You can do a fixed ratio, and what the fixed ratio will mean is that it will give you, again, it'll give you a ratio. This is not going to be, so I'm going to put in a 4x5. So I will do a width of 5, hit the tab key and go to height, then put in 4. So this is not going to be 4 by 5 inches. This is simply going to be a ratio of 4 to 5. So a ratio of 2 to 2.5 would also be a 4 to 5. A ratio of 8 to 10 would also be a ratio of 4 to 5. Anyway, that's all it's giving you. If you click and you drag this out, all of this, no matter what, this will give you that 4 by 5 ratio in here. So that's what's going on in here. If we hit Command D to deselect that, and then finally go down to fixed size, this is where you really do have a pixel count or an inch count. In my case, I've actually got inches are my ruler readouts, so I'm going to double click on this and I am going to put in 4 to 5 inches. So I'm going to do a width of 5 and change that pixel to IN. Hit the, 5 IN. Hit the tab key to go over to your height, and I'm going to put in 4 space IN, and then it's actually changing the pixel again. So again, I want 4 IN, and yeah.
How can I change the unit from pixels to?
So go to your ruler, hover over your ruler, hold down your Control key, and click in the drop-down menu and change pixels to inches.
With the ruler, the unit.
Are you talking about the width and height that you're entering right now? You have to type it in. So simply type 5. Right now you've got 5 pixels. Is that what you have? Yeah, you just select across the whole thing. You erase the entire thing and do 5 IN for inch. Did it work?
Mine is not giving me
Right,
a
because-
measurement at all. It's just 5 or it's not like.
But just type it in, it doesn't matter. But you're actually still in fixed ratio, you're not in fixed size, that's why. Fixed size, not right. So it's 5, guys, it's fixed size that we're working with here, not fixed ratio. Are we good on this part? Okay. Anybody in here have a roommate they hate? Yeah, go into their Photoshop and actually go to any selection tool, change the feathering to like, do something very subtle. Do like a 5 pixel, 10, maybe 10 pixel, whatever. Just something subtle enough to really fuck them up. And then also change that drop down menu to ratio or to fixed size, whatever will drive them out of their minds. It will drive them absolutely nuts. Yeah. The other thing you can do, I don't know that this still works. You can try this on your own. I think they fixed this. But it used to be if you had a tablet plugged in, if you actually laid the stylus down on your tablet, it would drive the cursor on your screen crazy. And so the trick, again, for the roommate that you hate is plug a tablet into this and then hide the tablet, put it somewhere else on the desk where nobody can see it, lay the stylus down on it, and when they actually try to go in and do anything, when they try to work with a mouse, their cursor will be bouncing all over the place. There's just, it's like a cursor on serious drugs. Anyway,
Have you done this before?
maybe. So at any rate, to get back to your normal, because all this stuff is sticky, to get back to your normal behavior that you would expect, go back to the normal for your style and make sure that your feathering is set to 0. Command D to deselect. So in the drop-down menu again, you can see now we have an elliptical marquee tool. I'm going to the next one down. And ellipses are simply circles. So if you click and you drag out with no modifier, you get an ellipse. You can make them really narrow. You can make them really broad. If you hold down the Shift key, it will constrain it to a circle. If you hit Command D to deselect then and hover over the crosshair of your 2 guides again, hold down the Option key and click and drag out. Sorry, not the Control key, but the Option key. Click and drag out. You will have your ellipse will actually be, the center of your lips will be that cross part. Again, if you add the Shift key on top of that, you'll get circles, and it's the easiest way to actually pull that part out. Command D to deselect that. The next one down, if you take a look, is single row marquee and single column marquee. And what these were really designed to do, most of you guys don't run into this anymore. You're not going to have this problem. But in the old days, if you actually had what was called a dead pixel or a hot pixel on your sensor, it could actually impact an entire row. So you would lose an entire row of pixels or an entire column of pixels on your sensor. This was a way to go in really tight and select them all, because again, it would knock out the entire row on your sensor. So it was a perfectly straight row or a perfectly straight column would be dead. This would allow you to select that entire thing, and then you could actually work with it. You could fill it with using a clone stamp tool or whatever. But that's what these things are really here for. I don't know anybody who's ever really used them, but nonetheless, that's what they're there for. The next tool down is the freehand tool, so it's the lasso tool. Again, if you click the drop-down menu, you'll see that there's 3 versions. There's the lasso tool, the polygonal lasso tool, and the magnetic lasso tool. We're going to grab the just regular lasso tool, and you can simply do freeform drawing. Again, if you do another drawing, it'll actually get rid of the first one. It's the same behavior. If you want to add to your drawing, hold down the Shift key and you can add to the selection. If you want to subtract, hold down the Option key and you can get rid of the selection. You have feathering as well, so you'll see that you could actually add a feathering to this to do the same sort of soft edge that we did before. Command D to deselect. If you go to the next tool down, the polygonal lasso tool, this will actually put points down based on mouse clicks. So I'm going to, hang on one second, I'm going to start over again. Okay, so sorry. This is the maddening thing about this tool. I'm going to start on one of my lines. I'm simply going to click once. You do not need to hold your cursor down. You can simply then move to another place and click again, and this will allow you to put straight line points down so you can actually do sort of anything. When you get back to the original point that you started, you'll notice that your cursor changes and you get this little sort of weird shaped thing with a little circle on it. That indicates that you're completing the selection. Click on that and you'll have the marching ants. Command D to deselect. We're going to do this one more time, but I want you to stop before you do your last leg. So I'm going to come up here and do my almost, so I've still got one leg that I haven't done. If you simply double click at this point, it will complete the line for you. It'll take it back to the original selection and you can move on from there. Command D to deselect. And the last tool down, we need to actually open up another file to use the last tool down. So if you can go to your session 3 folder in your student files for week 3, inside of that there is 2 files that are listed as gradients. One is just a gradient, the other is a gradient version 2. If you can double click on the just regular gradient, it will open up another image in Photoshop. Now this happens to me all the time. Take a look at my screen right here. I not only have Photoshop actually open and both of my files visible, but I've also got a lot of other stuff that I'm seeing. I've got shit that's on my desktop is actually showing through here. All this kind of other stuff is showing through here. I've got a couple of ghosted out parts of Finder windows in here. If you only want to see Photoshop, come up to the Photoshop menu down and come down to Hide Others, and it will get rid of all of that other shit. I do have this image that's got the gradient on it with the red line in the middle of it. If you double click on the hand, it will get as large as it can get. I'm going to temporarily put away my other image by clicking on the little red radio yellow radio button at the very top. It will actually park it off screen. So now we're actually going to go to the magic, what the hell do they call it? The magic lasso tool, magnetic lasso tool. The last one down in the lasso group. If you click on that one and come over to your image, this is a brush. You actually can feather this, but it's a brush that you can control its size. So again, controlling the size of brushes, there are the bracket keys to the right of the P key. The bracket key that's closest to the P key is the closed bracket, which makes it, or the open bracket, which makes your brush smaller. Your bracket key to the right of that, and the closed bracket key makes your brush larger. But what you're really looking for is a brush with that little dot in the middle, and if you hover that little dot right over the edge of the red and the gradient and click and start to drag along that line, you'll see that it starts to throw down points for you. This is actually a tool, a pen tool version of these points. And you'll notice that it does a really pretty good job of it. It puts down a whole lot of points, though, more than I would like, but nonetheless. If you then hover up into the gradient, you'll actually notice that things start going weird up in here. And the reason they're going weird up in here is that there is no line for this thing to find. What the magnetic lasso tool does is it looks for edges, and it looks to drop points on edges. Now, we've got way better tools. This is the oldest of the sort of AI auto selection tools that exist in Photoshop. I don't know anybody who uses this tool. There's just better tools to use than this one. So, but I wanted you to know what it was and how it worked. Again, if you bring it all the way back to the original point, you'll notice that you get Again, your cursor changes, and if you click, it'll actually give you that as a selection. Command D to deselect. Do not, these are all these tools are sticky, so I'm going to say go back to your lasso tool at the very top, and I would also say go back to the rectangular marquee tool on the tool that's right above it. The next tool down, we start to get into the auto selection tools. So there is the quick selection tool, is the one we're not the one we're going to start with. We're actually going to start with the magic wand tool. It's the oldest of the tools. Does everybody have object selection, quick selection, and magnetic? And magic wand. Is anybody missing any of those? If you're missing any of these tools, you can actually actually come in and edit how all of these tools are laid out. To do that, come to your edit menu all the way down to toolbar. So up to the edit menu, down to toolbar. I think Windows is in the same place. Open this up. These are how all your toolbars are laid out. You'll notice at the very top you have the move tool. Then there's an artboard tool that I never use, but that's what's nested inside this move tool. Then the rectangular tools. If you never use the single marquee tool, the single row marquee tool, whatever, you can click on this and drag it to the right. This will then remove it from that marquee tool. And so if you come over here and if you say done to this, and then click on that drop-down menu here, the drop-down menu here, you'll see that row is now missing. It's no longer there. To get it back, you would go back up to the edit menu, down to toolbar, grab the single row tool and bring it back into place, into the group where it's sitting under that particular tool. So you can go in and you can move these things around. They don't need to be grouped together. So let's say the quick selection tool and the lasso tool you use all the time, whatever. You can put those two together in the same spot. So this is completely customizable for you. I'm going to go ahead and say done for this because it's back to my original. I am going to go up to the magic wand tool, and when you do the magic wand tool, a couple things happen that matter to us quite a bit. The first is that if you take a look up at the options part, whatever, you'll see that there's a sample size. I need to make sure that you click on the drop-down menu for that sample size and change it from point sample to 3x3. Most people use 3x3. Some people will use a 5x5 average, but you do not want to use point sample. And what this... So if it's not in your sidebar here, go up to the edit menu, down to toolbar, and in toolbar click on restore defaults and then hit done, and then go back and see if the magic wand tool is there now. Yes or no? It's the tool right underneath the lasso. Okay, with the magic wand tool selected up at the very top, you need to change your sample size from point sample to 3x3 or 5x5. I use 3x3, and what this does is, the reason we want to do this is that instead of doing sampling a single pixel of your image, it does a square, 3 pixels wide by 3 pixels tall, and it averages that together. And the reason we use that instead of a point sample is that there are certain things in your image called either dead pixels or hot pixels. A dead pixel is permanently black. It doesn't matter. It's a fault in your file or it's a fault in your sensor. A hot pixel is one that's permanently white. You don't ever see them unless you're zooming in so close that you can actually see the pixels, but you can hit one if you keep it at point sample, which will then pervert what you're trying to do in all of this. So that's why most people change this to a 3x3. That's the way I keep mine. In terms of the tolerance, you want to change your tolerance. If mine was set up to 65, the default for tolerance is 32, and I'm going to actually ask you to set that back to 32 as well. In terms of anti-aliasing, what this is going to do is it's actually going to try to give you a soft edge selection. So you're not going to see this on the video, but you will, you probably won't hear it either. So I'm going to pause pause the video right now so that you don't have to wade through this. All right. So, yep, we're recording again. So that's what anti-aliasing is about. Contiguous, by default, is your all's, when you look at yours, contiguous is turned on or off? Off, yeah, the default is off. So what happens here with the magic wand tool selected, so this would be the defaults of how it's set up. Just come down onto the red line and click. And it makes a selection of your red. It does a perfect job of it. So what you find that the magic wand tool does really well are hardcore graphic shapes in your image. If they've got really defined edges and they're relatively hardcore graphic like this, it's a great tool to use. It's one of the oldest ones, if not the oldest selection tool in Photoshop, automatic selection tools that exist. And it does a really good job. So don't dismiss it out of hand. There's in many cases better tools to use for certain things, but anyway, that's the way this one works. I'm going to hit Command D to deselect, and instead now I'm going to hover over my image. And what I'm looking for is, I'm looking for an RGB readout of 100, 100, 100. So I'm going to bring my cursor to the point where I get it to read 100, 100, 100. So it does right now. I'm just moving my cursor along the gradient. So what it's doing is it's reading the gradient tone. And again, neutral grays are made up of equal amounts of RGB. So this 100, 100, 100 is actually a value of gray. Does that make sense, everyone? And simply click once. And what you'll actually see in here right now is we've got two sets of marching ants. So that's telling me that the contiguous part actually is on by default, not this. So I'm going to hit Command D to deselect, turn contiguous on, and then go again. Find that 100, 100, 100 place of gray and click once. And you'll notice that you only get the marching ants on the top. And that is because what I've said with contiguous selected, it's saying wherever you selected, we're going to do two things. Number one, we're going to look at the value that you have, and then we're going to actually add 32 tones and subtract 32 tones, and that's going to be your selection. So if you hover your cursor out over the edge of the marching ants on the right-hand side, you'll see that I get a 134, 134, 130. It's a very close 132. That tolerance of 132 said, okay, you're going to select on the 100s. I'm going to give you 32 tones on top of that and 32 tones less. So now my tonal range, my 32 less would be 68. If you go to the other side, to the left-hand side, and hover right over that cursor part, you'll see that it's in 67, 68. The reason I don't have a perfect 67 or 68 is, again, this whole thing about anti-aliasing. Does this make sense, everybody, what's going on? If you hit Command J and then turn off, Command J jumps your selection to a new layer. So you can see I've got a new layer going on right here, and basically it was the selection that I had. It copy and pasted it to a new layer. That's what Command J does. If you turn off the background layer, you will see how jagged the edge is as you start to zoom in. This jagged edge that we get on this is due to the anti-aliasing. That's what has created this, because it's trying to make this a selection that will then fit inside another selection and not be so obvious. That's what's basically going on here. It's more organic. Now in our case, we're not really working with an organic shape, but nonetheless, that's what's going on here. Shoot.
Why does contiguous seem
So I'm going to show you right now. So if you go back, you can throw that top layer away. Double click on the hand to go back out to full screen. Grab the magic wand tool again and then unclick contiguous and then find that 100 mark again. And now when you click, what'll happen is you will actually get anywhere in your image that falls within this range of tones is now picked. They do not have to touch each other. So it's just a way to either be more discriminate about your selection or to do it for your whole image. In most cases, most people want these selections to be the whole image. Yes?
So this is a lot more ordered because let's say you're like
Yes, we're going to get to that in just a second, but there's better ways of doing that. So we're going to look at the better ways. Yeah, Barb. We're going to get to color range in just a second, so hold that thought. Okay, questions about any of this part? Are we good about this? The other thing that you need to know about this is that once you set this sample size and tolerance, this impacts other tools in here, specifically the quick selection tool, the object selection tool. All of those inherit this same thing. There's other things. The eyedropper tool inherits this 3x3 sample size. So a lot of it's controlled. However, it inherits it, but that doesn't mean if you actually grab your eyedropper tool and change it from 3x3 to say 5x5, it will change it back into your magic wand, will also change to 5x5. So it's universal, this sample size. Are we good on this part? All right. Command D to deselect. The next tool down we're going to do is the object selection tool. I'm not object selection, but the quick selection tool. So we talked a little bit about this last week when we were doing the selection of the sky for the castles. The thing about this tool is that it looks for edges, and you want to let the tool do its work. You do not ever want to touch the edge that you want to find. So to use this tool, I'm going to make my brush just a little bit bigger. I'm going to start in the upper left-hand corner. I'm going to click and start to drag out. And you'll notice before I even I'm not even in the middle of my picture. It uses predictive technology to try to say, oh, this is what you want. I understand what it is you want. And so it gives me that selection of the gradient at the top. It found the edge for the red. That part was great. Unlike the other selection tools, though, if you come down to the gradient that's on the bottom part right now, and you click and you drag out, it doesn't get rid of the original selection. It's constantly in add mode. You can see, if you look really closely, there's a little plus in the middle of this circle. If you hold down the Option key, it'll actually change to a minus, and now you can click and you can start to drag out to get it to remove some of your selection. So this is how you would actually use that tool to remove parts of that. But the part that I wanted to show you to see how this doesn't work, Command D to deselect that. If you click and you drag along the red line, what you'll see now is, again, I wanted it to only pick the gradient, but I crossed the red line, so it simply starts to look for the next edge that it can find, and so it grabs the one that's on the bottom. Does that make sense, everyone? What's going on here? All right. Command D to deselect that guy. Yeah, we need to do one more thing here really quickly. Hit just the M key will give you the marquee tool, and simply click and drag out a selection. Yes. I hope. Yep. Thanks. So just drag a marquee selection out just like this. So, and then I'm going to drag guidelines on top of this. So if you drag guidelines out, if you've got a selection going, your guides will actually snap to the marching ants. So I'm going to grab a ruler at the very top, and I'm going to click and drag down to have a guideline on the top of the marching ants. I'm going to drag a second one down to snap to the bottom. I'm going to drag one to snap to the right side and one to snap to the left side. So this gives us our marching ants. I'm also going to save this selection. So up to the select menu, come down to save selection. I'm going to call it box 3. I don't have any other boxes in here, but I don't want to work at it that hard. So now I've got the selection saved. You can modify your selections once they're actually made. To modify your selections, come up to the select menu, down to modify, and the first one we're going to start with is feather. So in the feather one, I'm going to put in 20 pixels for my feather, and I'm going to say OK to that. And then I'm going to jump this to its own layer, Command J. Turn off the lower background layer, and you'll see it softened, it feathered that selection after the fact, and then when I did the jump here, this is what we ultimately get. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay. Command Z will take you back before we did that, and then Command Option Z will take you back, and it will continue to go back in step. So Command Z will go back, but Command Z again alone will just go back and forth between those two states. Command Option Z will work your way all the way back in history. If you can't remember that, you can actually do it in your history palette that's on the side. Not if you change your preferences to the way I have mine set up, the way we did in the very beginning. You're absolutely right. It's been changed, but most people now are using the legacy version of this because it's too hard to remember between programs. But either way, however you do it. If it's not working for you, just go back in history. The next one down. So up to the select menu, down to modify, contract, and we're going to put in 20 pixels and say OK. And you notice it pulls in your selection. If we hit Command Z to undo that and go to the next modify, expand, and put in 20 pixels and say OK, my selection is now bigger. Something to take notice of here, if you look at this, we'll Command J this to its own, just do Command J and put it on its own layer and turn off the bottom. What you'll notice is that the corners of this are clipped. And the reason the corners are clipped is that when I said I want a 20 pixel expansion, it looked at the line where I was and it expanded it out 20 pixels, and that's fine for the side. It did the same, for the bottom, and it does the same for the top and both sides. But what it also does is it looks at the point that's right here where these two intersect, where the corner was, and it does 20 pixels out in this direction, so this gets trimmed off to keep it as a 20 pixel expansion. If this was now a perfect square out here, the distance from this pixel point, from the point where the corner was out to the new corner, would be more than 20 pixels. Make sense? Okay. Command Z to undo that. Command Option Z to go back. I get to my original square going here. The next one up to the select menu, down to modify, and we're going to do border and put in 20 pixels for border. It's just easier to see. And what you'll notice now has happened is that it actually does half of that 20 pixel as a expand and half of that 20 pixel as a contract. And this is what it gives you in the middle. If you hit Command J to jump that to its own layer, you'll see it's an extremely narrow set of what's actually been selected and jumped here. So a lot of people, when you first start doing composite work and you're having trouble that your edges of your whatever figure that you're putting onto a new background look too hard, this is a great trick to actually soften them up. I can actually blend parts of my outside edge along with part of my background by doing this very trick, and I don't have to go in and do some major selection in there. Make sense? Okay. You can throw that top layer away, the one that actually did that part. Yeah. Let's close this up. Open up the Corvette again, please. If you've already had the Corvette open, come up to the File menu, down to Open Recent, and in your Open Recent list, you should be able to find Red Car. It's just a faster way to get to it. Double-click on the hand. So the next one we're going to go to is we're going to start to get into the automated selection parts. So if you come up to the Select menu and come down to Color Range, a dialog box will actually open up, and in my case, does your all's image look black and white, or does it look just normal? The big image? Normal. So I'm going to click mine to none so that it looks like yours right now. So what you have in this color range dialog box, you have a drop-down menu at the very top where you can actually, by default, it is going to select sample. Yes. So up to the Select menu, down to Color Range. Okay. And again, I'll set mine to normal, to none. So in the drop-down menu, selected sample colors. This will allow you to actually pick the color that you want to select. You get to pick this. You get to choose. If you use that and hover over your image, you'll see you get a targeting icon on here, and you can click on something. Don't click on anything yet. You can also, in this drop-down menu, you can do a canned set of reds, yellows, greens, cyans, blues, and magentas. The problem with these is that you get no control about what is considered red. So Photoshop determines this. You don't get to pick that. So if it falls in the range of red that Photoshop thinks is red, you're good to go. But if all of a sudden part of your image is moving into the yellows, that's not going to be something that Photoshop is going to actually select. So I don't ever use these. I don't know anybody who really does. Again, if you had probably process color image or something that had been scanned, this might have some value, but for the most part, no. highlights, midtones, and shadows. These do have value because they've actually made this box better. So click on highlights. We're just going to start here. And you'll see with highlights actually on there, you can actually get a range of highlights. This range controls it. Now, you've got a really little baby thumbnail here that's showing you what it thinks are highlights that it's going to choose. I prefer a much bigger preview. To get a bigger preview, use the selection preview drop-down menu at the bottom of this. Click on it and come down to grayscale. Now this image, your image down here, will reflect what is in the bigger, what's in the thumbnail part right down in here. And you'll notice is if you change your range, so if I take my range down to 142, what I'm telling Photoshop is that everything that is a 142 or lighter, I want selected. Everything that is less than 142, I want not selected. So this allows you to really go in and control what are considered to be highlights and what are not considered to be highlights. If you come to the drop-down menu down to midtones, you get two controls. You get a highlight slider and you get a shadow slider. And this controls what, again, would be considered midtones. So in my case, I set my shadow slider at 41, my highlights at 203. What I'm selecting is everything between 41 and 203 is a midtone. I'm telling Photoshop what I want to. So these things actually have a much more useful control than the colors. And if you go to shadows, it does the same thing. It gives you a single range slider. If we go in that drop-down menu and come down to skin tones never works. Don't bother using it. It doesn't. It's supposed to pick up Caucasian skin tone. It does a shitty job of that. And just between you and me, there's a lot more skin tone than Caucasian skin tone in the world. So I consider this as a racist insult personally, but nonetheless. I'm going to go back up to sampled colors at the very top because this is what everybody uses and what we want to use. With sampled colors at the very top, you'll have a fuzziness slider. I'm going to say drag your fuzziness slider down to 32. Again, this would be the default. You'll also notice that there are three little eyedroppers underneath the buttons that exist over on the side. The first of the eyedropper works like all selection tools. If you come over, I'm just going to come over and select the upper part of the fender of the red car. I'm just going to click right there to actually build a selection. And you'll see that it actually builds a selection. It's a very tight selection because I've got a very small fuzziness here. So what it's selecting is the color that's underneath this, and then it's also selecting any 32 colors that are darker than this and 32 colors that are lighter than this. So if you grab your fuzziness slider and you drag it down, it gets even more specific. So now I'm down to a 13. So now it's selected the color that I was under, plus 13 tones and minus 13 tones. So there's only 27 tones out of 256 that I've selected in here. It's a very, very, very narrow range. If we select this and drag it up to, say, like 100, then what it's now doing is it's saying, okay, the color you picked plus 100 tones lighter, 100 tones darker. And that's what's basically happening here. Make sense? My suggestion to you is that you keep your fuzziness low in the beginning. So I'm going to grab my fuzziness down to 32 again. But you'll notice now if I click underneath the area that's highlighted, it changes. So this is just like all the selection tools. It gets rid of the original selection and makes a brand new one. If you want to add to your selection, you have to change eyedroppers. You go to the plus eyedropper that's, again, on the far right-hand side underneath the, OK, cancel load. Click on the plus, and now when you actually click on something else, it adds to your selection. You not only can click, you can actually click and drag. So I'm going to click and drag the red side of the car on the side, and you can see it picks up a huge amount because I ultimately hit into the white panel that was on the side of the car. Command Z works in this situation as well. I can go back to that, and then I'm just going to grab more of the front of the car to actually get a better selection. So I'm starting out, I can actually do the top hood of the car as well. This is giving me, so this is adding to the selection now. And once you get a decent selection going like this, I might even try to get the panels, parts that are in the around the edges of the car. This is now adding, and now I've got a reasonably good selection of the red. Now you can actually use your fuzziness slider to broaden that out or to tighten it up, depending on whatever it is you're trying to do. And then finally, when you're happy with your, oh, you should also notice there's a negative selection here as well. So if you was selecting something that you didn't want it to pick, you would click on the negative selection part. I'm just going to click on it so you can see what's going on. And I'm going to hit a panel over here, and it'll start to subtract that area from my ultimate selection. I'm going to Command Z to undo that, and then I'm going to go ahead and say OK to this. This is now going to be the red of the car. Again, at this stage of the game, I would save this selection up to the select menu, down to save, and call it red. And say OK to that. Command D to deselect. And if you take a look down at the bottom, you've now got your red car. This would be the selected part of it all. And because this is a channel now, you can work on this with a brush, or you can blur this, or you can do all sorts of things. Are we good on this part? Questions about this? All right, I'm going to close this guy up. I'm not going to save it. The next image that I want you to go to is, in your session number 3. I want to get through this part, guys, and then we'll take a quick break. There is a file called Select and Mask Practice File. If you can open that. If you get a color mismatch warning, that's a good thing, because this is an sRGB file and our working space is Adobe RGB. If you did not get this warning, we have a problem. You need to let me know, because we need to change your color settings. So if you did not, you need to go up to I'm going to cancel out. I'm going to hit OK on mine right now, but you need to go up to your edit menu, down to color settings. And in the drop-down menu for settings, you need to change yours from North American General Purpose 2 to North American Prepress 2. And say OK. You good? OK. Now when you open that file, you'll get a warning. But it doesn't matter right now. So I'm going to close up the synthetic file that I had going on in the very beginning. I don't need to save that. So basically, does everybody have this file open? Picture of a girl on a fleshy colored pinkish background on top of another layer that's actually a beach scene. Everybody have this part? Anybody not? Okay. So get to the Select and Mask workspace. The easiest way, you can pick selection tools. So if you pick a selection tool, you'll get the option to do a Select and Mask button in the options bar up at the top. But if you don't have that selected, so let's say you have the Move tool selected, it doesn't exist there, but it will always be under the Select menu. So go up to the Select menu regardless and come down to Select and Mask. And what Select and Mask does is that it tries to give you a way to see both of your elements in here. So when it opens up here, to make sure that you've got the same screen that I've got here, and then I'll explain what we're looking at. On the right-hand side, under Properties at the very top, on the drop-down for View, you want to make sure that you have onion skin selected at the very top, and then you want to make sure that your transparency is set to 50%. So what this is now showing us is that it gives us a preview of both of our layers so that we can see what actually is being selected and what isn't. If you don't have both of these options available, sometimes it gets to be really tricky to see what really is being selected and what isn't being selected. If you take a look at the toolbar on the top left-hand corner, at the very top, the thing that's sitting at the very top is the quick selection tool. It's identical. Some people will actually start their process by making a quick selection tool selection in Photoshop and then come here into Select and Mask. You don't need to do that. This is the same damn tool that's sitting right there. The tool that's underneath it is the Refine Edge tool. We'll look at that in just a second. The tool that's underneath that is a typical brush. It's a regular brush. It works just like brushes in Photoshop. The tool underneath this is, I think, the Object Selection tool. The tool under that is the Lasso tool, works just like the one in Photoshop. The tool under that is the Hand, the Move tool, which works just like it does in Photoshop, as does the magnifying glass. So we're going to start with the Quick Selection tool. It's up at the very top. It is a brush. The keyboard shortcuts for brush size work here as well. So I'm going to use the close bracket key next to the right of the P key to make my brush a little bit bigger. So I want to select the girl and all the hair. But again, remember with this tool, you cannot actually touch the edge. So this edge where her hair meets the blue sky up at the top, I can't use this tool to cross that. If I use it to cross that, it's going to then stop looking for the hair edge and start looking for the edge of the sky that's in the background. So I'm going to start, but I'm going to, and again, stay away from the edges, stay away from her eyelashes, from her nose, from her lips. You want to avoid all of that. Let the tool do its job. But if you click and you start to come down, you will see that what the onion skin does is it shows you what has been selected, because she is now, the area of her that is selected now is fully 100% opaque. There's no transparency to her anymore, so you don't see the background through her anymore. However, you still see the hair that's up here at the very top. You'll see that it's still ghosted out, and so that's telling me it's not part of my selection. You'll also notice here in this other area of hair that's up in here, it's got part of the background that is selected in it. To see what this really means, if you go to your view menu for the drop-down menu that's over here on the edge, click on your view menu and come down to black and white. This shows you the mask that it's going to create. Now, this does a really good job of her profile, but it does a horrible job of her hair. And all of that stuff is missing. So I'm going to go back to the onion skin for my view. We need to fix this part. You can't use the quick selection tool to fix this. I need to add hair that's at the very top that's not in there, but I also need to remove background that's also in there. That's the next tool down. It is the Refine Edge tool. And if you click on it and bring it over onto your screen, it's also a brush. You can make it larger or smaller. In this case, you want to paint this tool over these areas that are really hard to find. However, you do not want to use this tool down in the body of the image. So the area that's already well selected, like her skin, like all of this, it's already well selected, do not use this tool here. It will only fuck your selection up. But you can use this tool in this area where I've got background and hair mixed. So simply come out and start to paint along this, and you can see it understands what I'm trying to do. It's getting rid of the background. I'm going to continue to paint on this area that's now right underneath that part. Now I've got area of hair that's not selected. I want to add that, so that's still this very same tool. You paint over all of those edges. There's also hair that is at the very back of the nape of her neck that has not been selected. All of that needs to be selected. So this is the way you come in to refine those selections. Now if we take a look in our drop-down menu for view and come down to black and white, this is now the quality of your mask, and you can see it's a considerably better mask. It has very fine hair, detail, all of that kind of stuff is actually in here. What you will notice when you get to this stage of the game, though, is that there's some hair that's running along the very back of the nape of her neck that should be part of this. However, if I run the tool across this, all my Refine Edge tool, this is exactly what I told you to avoid. It's actually gone in here now, and it's starting to add stuff in an area where it shouldn't be added. This is now removing the hair that's on the back of her neck. It's letting her skin, her skin will be part of the selection, but the hair will be missing in all of this. So this is the exact wrong move. I don't want to make this. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. Instead, I'm going to go to the next of the brushes down. The next of the brushes down, I'm also going to zoom in. Your keyboard shortcuts work here for zooming in as well, so I'm just holding down the space bar and the Command key. You can actually come in here and paint areas of this that you know should be a part of your mask. Stay away from the very edges. I'm not going to come up here and screw around with the upper part up in there. You can click on the drop-down menu here and also control the hardness or softness of your brush. I'm going to crank my brush hardness up to about 50% just so I have a little bit better control of it. And then I'm simply going to paint across this area of hair that I know should be part of my mask. Again, I'm going to stay away from the edges, but I know that that part should have been part of it as well. And that's pretty much all I need to do for this guy. As we start to come down on your properties panel on the right hand side, you'll see that there's a whole thing about edge detection and all that kind of stuff. You can avoid all of this for the time being right now. The global refinements, you're going to avoid those forever anyway, because there's better ways of doing this once we get into Photoshop. But then finally down to the output settings here. In the output at the very bottom, if you click on the drop-down menu, you can say your first one would be, oh, I want you to output this as a selection, and it'll just give you the marching ants. It's not really going to help you. The next one is layer mask. You can use layer mask, and that's what I'm going to use on this. The next one is new layer. The problem with new layer is what this will do is this will actually create a new layer. It'll put a layer mask on there, but then it will apply the layer mask, which will remove all of the background from the girl image. You do not want to do that because there's no recovering from that. If you come down to new layer with a layer mask, you can pick that. That's non-destructive. A new document is, again, it'll create a brand new document, but it will take that image, apply the layer mask, which is a destructive move. You do not want to do that. And then new document with a new layer mask. That, again, is non-destructive. So our non-destructive options in here are selection, layer mask, new layer with layer mask, or new document with layer mask. Those are your only options. Everything else in here is destructive, and you do not want to do it. So I'm going to just leave it at layer mask, and I'm going to click OK. And you've now just done your first composite. Double click on the hand, and this is the girl showing through.
And just one question.
Shoot.
For the third brush, I still don't get it.
Of the third brush, it allows you to paint areas that you know need to be part of your layer mask but are not. That the other tools, the automatic selection tools, didn't understand that that was supposed to be a part of your layer mask. Because otherwise, this area that's on the back of her hair right here, part of this, actually the sky would be showing through areas of her hair right here. But I painted that area using that brush. Make sense? Okay. Are there questions about this?
I have a question.
Shoot.
I saw like a significant amount of hair.
That's because you missed all of that and you didn't use the refined brush on that. So you can go back into select and mask. So go back up to it, right back into select and mask. Go back to the onion skin. Then grab your second tool down, the refine edge tool, and paint over all that hair that's in the middle.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Yes, some other question, Haley? Anybody else? I'm sorry, what? Output 2, you want to pick layer mask. Not new layer, that is destructive. Not new document, that's destructive. Layer mask will give you this layer mask, but it won't destroy your image. So take a look at this, guys. You've now got a layer mask on your image. If you hover over your layer mask, so everybody do this, these are shortcuts that you're going to need to know. If you hold down your option key and you click on the layer mask, it shows you the layer mask, and you can actually edit it here. You can come in and you could actually take a brush here. I'm going to take the B key to get a brush, make it smaller. White is my foreground color, and I'm just going to paint a line out there like this. And now take a look at my image. It's actually showing the background where I just painted it. You can still work on these things once you get a layer mask. If you hold down the Shift key and click on your layer mask, it hides it. That's why you get this big red X on it. Holding down Shift key and clicking again shows it again. So I'm going to go back when I just did my selected mask so I don't have that line coming down on it. But is this making sense to what's going on in here? If you didn't get it correct the first time, you can go right back into select and mask. Make sure you've got the top layer selected and the mask itself is selected. Up to select and mask, and you can go right back into it. Make sense? Okay. I'm going to cancel out of this. What else was I going to tell you? What else was I going to tell you? What else was I going to tell you? No idea. You can close this guy up. Let me see where we're at here really quickly. So I would love to give you a break right now, but we've only got roughly 45 minutes to get through quite a bit. So I'm just going to soldier on. Sorry about that. Next thing I want you to open up, go back into your session 3 files and there's the second gradient. I want you to double click on the second. So it's gradient version 2. It's very similar to the first one, except it's got RGB. It's got a red bar, a green bar, and a blue bar in it. So how many of you people have spent an absolute fortune on Adobe products? Right? Adobe's worth billions. Billions and billions and billions and billions. There are two brothers who actually wrote the original program, the Knoll brothers, Jonathan Knoll and his brother Thomas. Thomas is now still the head of what happens for Photoshop. But you spend an absolute fortune on your stuff, right? And you would think that, oh man, what these guys did was just a miracle. I mean, it was just amazing. And you look at how deep Photoshop is and what it can really do. But what you don't realize here is that these two brothers came up with one simple premise about how to control a color image. And that was it. And everything that exists in Photoshop goes back to that one idea, to that one original idea. So they have this one original idea, great idea, but it's cost you so much money, and they've made such an obscene amount of money off of this one idea. And so the one idea is this: masking. So how many of you guys, we talk about masking, and I think everybody sort of feels good about it, but somebody, can you really tell me what masking is? What does it really do? Do you understand masking and what it really does? So what masking is, it's all masks are black and white, and what they do is they control what you can see or can't see. That's all that they do. So the adage goes, white reveals, black conceals. That is true in layer masking. If you have an area of a layer mask that, or any mask, it's not just layer masking, it's just masking in general. If you have an area that is black, it hides that image, that area of the image. If you have an area of your mask that is white, it shows that image. If you have gray tones in between, it gives you transparency. So to see what that means, hit Command J to actually make a duplicate of your background layer. We are going to add, sorry, that was Command N, Command J. We'll simply make a copy of that layer area. We're going to add a layer mask to that. To add a layer mask with, I don't have any selection going on here. To add a layer mask, if you come down and you click on the icon at the bottom of your layers palette that's a square, it's a white square with a little dark circle in the middle, it will actually add a layer mask to it. You can tell I've got a layer mask. It's sitting here. It is white. It's actually showing this right now. And you can see that there's white borders that go around this layer mask. That tells me that any of the tools that I use right now will impact the mask, not the image that's underneath it, or not the image itself, not the image content. I'm also going to change my background layer now to a solid color. And since my foreground and my background colors are reds right now, I want to change that. So I'm going to hit the D key to default my colors to black and white. And then I'm going to fill my background color with black. So I've got the background layer is selected. Again, with foreground colors black and white at their defaults. If you hold down the Option Delete, it will fill your background with the foreground color. So I've just filled it with black. Then I'm going to go back to my layer mask on the very top layer. Make sure that you've selected the mask, and because you've got the black borders around it, I'm going to hit the B key, which is the shortcut for getting a brush. Immediately your eyes should go up to the options bar. The first thing you want to do is click on the type of brush size. In this drop-down menu, it'll come down. This will give you the hardness or softness of your brush. I never use the size control in here. I do that all on screen using my bracket keys. But this will give you the hardness. I want you to grab the hardness and take it all the way to 100% hard. That means the brush edge is going to be completely solid and hard. If you go to 0% hardness, it gives you a very soft edge. So you need to get rid of this flyout menu when you do this, and you don't want to hover over your image and click on your image because it'll get rid of the flyout menu, but it'll also make a mark on your image, and you don't want to do that. So hover over the word that says Adobe and click on Adobe. That will get rid of your flyout menu without causing any other change of your image. It's just a safety spot. It doesn't necessarily have to be Adobe. You could click on Photoshop. You could click on the area next to it. You're just clicking on an area that doesn't impact your image at all. You want to make sure that the blending mode of your brush is normal, that the opacity is 100%, that the flow is 100%, and then the smoothing is a 10% default. You can leave that all at its defaults. I'm going to then use this layer mask. I'm going to hit the X key to make black my foreground color, and I'm simply then going to paint a line across this. And what you see happens is that it allows the image underneath to actually show through. So I'm going to do a better version of this. Let's go back in history to where it says, go back in the whole thing where you have add layer mask. Go back to that place in history. I'm going to keep this grid, instead of making this black, because it's confusing to paint with black and see black, and you would just think, well, you could do that on the image. So instead, I'm going to come down to the original layer and I'm going to invert it, Command I. That will change all of its colors, that flips all of the primary RGBs to the secondary CMY, and it also flips the gradient, so it goes back and forth. So this way you can now really see the difference that's showing up. I'm going to click on the layer mask on the top layer again, and again with my brush selected and black is my foreground color, I'm going to drag across this, and you can see where my layer mask is black, it is hiding this second layer. It's hiding the RGB layer, and it's allowing the CMYK layer to show through. Does that make sense to everybody? If you hit the X key again, you make white your foreground color. You can then paint over areas of this. Again, now you can see that only the areas of my layer mask that are dark are actually showing the CMYK version. Everything else is showing the RGB version. If you actually come over to your layers palette and come down into the middle, the gradient tool is actually right in the very middle. If you click on the gradient tool and click on a flyout menu, so again, look at where I am. We're just going to pull a gradient along this mask to show you what can happen. So I'm going to pick the gradient tool. Immediately, again, your eyes should go up to the menu that's up at the very options up at the very top. I'm going to ask you, at least for the time being, to change your gradient from gradient to classical gradient. Then in the drop-down menu that's right next to this, if you click on that drop-down menu, it will open up. There's collections of pre-canned gradients. If you open up the group that's called Basic and click on the very first one, this is actually foreground color to background color, which is what we want. And then again, I'm going to click on this word up near the word Adobe to get that flyout menu to go away. And then you have types of gradient. And I'm going to ask you to, it's the 5 icons that sit right to the right of that drop-down menu we just had. Click on the very first one. This is a linear gradient. And now if you come over onto your image, and I'm going to click and I'm going to drag from the top down. So I'm going to click right at the very top. I'm going to click and drag down. If you want a perfectly vertical line, hold down your shift key. It'll give you a perfectly vertical line and let go. And now what you'll see has happened is that this has now done a gradual mix of the images of the stuff that was on the top to the stuff that's on the bottom now. So what has happened looking at this gradient, this is on my layer mask. Let me do it using my cursor. My layer mask right here, my layer mask right here, the bottom part is hiding the RGB image, and that's why all the yellow and the other gradient is showing through. On the very top of it, the white part is showing the original RGB version. Does that make sense what's going on here? If you click on the left side and drag to the right, again holding down the shift key, you'll get a perfectly horizontal gradient. You can now see exactly what's happening here as well. On the left side, look at my layer mask. The left side of the layer mask is white, so it's showing me the RGB version. But by the time I get to black, on the right-hand side, it's actually showing me the CMYK version. But I have a transition in the middle that is being controlled by those middle tones of gray. Does that make sense what is going on here and what masking is all about? Fine. Throw away this top layer. Invert the bottom layer, Command I will invert it back again. And then simply take a look at your layer masks and you can see exactly what is going on. It's not your layer masks, your channels. If you look at the red channel right here, you can see what's going on. In the red channel, I'm going to show you, you don't need to do this, but I'm going to show you mine. If you click on it, you can see it. There is white right here on the area of the image that is red. Then there is black on the areas that are green and blue. And that explains exactly what is going on. If you take a look, hover your cursor over the top of the red. So I've got the cursor right on the red stripe. Look at what it says on my RGB readouts. It's saying 255 for the red. That is the white stripe that is running in this mask. These are masks. These are channel masks. They allow what light can come through and what light cannot come through. So in the red channel, this mask is saying, okay, that red stripe, I'm going to let all the red in the world come through to that. On the green and the blue, it's saying, no, I'm going to hold all the back. There is no red in that. And if you hover over the green, you'll see your RGB readout says exactly that. It's saying, okay, there is, in this covering part right here, whatever. There is no red in this part at all. It's sitting at 0. And the same thing if you go down to blue. So this mask right here is controlling the red that you see, as is the green. Take a look at the green one right now. You have the white stripe is in the middle, showing all the green and hiding all the green from both the red and the blue sections. And then finally the blue one is doing the exact same thing if you scroll down. This is the thing that the Knoll brothers figured out, is that we can use a layer mask to either show you stuff or not, and that is it. So watch what happens. If we make a duplicate of this layer, so again, Command J to duplicate the layer, sorry, over on my layer, Command J to duplicate the layer. I'm actually going to just paint on this guy. So I'm going to hit a brush, the B key, and I'm simply going to paint across this. And look what happens to these 3 masks in here. It changes the red, the green, and the blue, and it actually puts an opaque version of that, which means you're not going to see where that stroke is. You can't see. There's no red, there's no green, there's no blue, and that's why you see this as black. Hit the X key to default to swap your foreground and background colors and cross in the other direction with white. And now what's has actually happened. In this area now, I've got a white stripe that's actually falling on the red, green, and blue, allowing all of the light, all 3 of them, to hit at equal intensity, the maximum intensity, and that's why we have white. Does this make sense to everybody, what's going on? So all that ever happens in Photoshop, all that, turn off of the eyeball really quickly on the second layer, it just changes the 3 channel masks. That's all that you ever do in Photoshop. If you turn this layer back on and come up to the filter menu and come down to blur and hit it with a serious Gaussian blur, sure, I'm gonna hit it like this. All it did was blur these layer masks. I mean, these channel masks. That's all it did. If you turn off the eyeball now, all we're doing is modifying these channel masks. That is it for Photoshop. There's nothing you can do in Photoshop that does anything except modify those 3 channels. That's the $1 billion idea. Okay, close this guy up. We've got one last thing to get to, and we should have time. So, there is, again, in your session number 3, there is a hair Fantasia image. It's copyrighted by Elise Gangs, whatever. But again, this was a working file that came out of lynda.com, which is now linkedin.com. And so for educational purposes, this should be no issue about working with this file for copyright. So I want to put this girl on a different background. How would you select the hair? That's the challenge in a nutshell. Quick selection tool, select and mask. We've already looked at that. Select and mask would probably be the best of them, but I tell you I've done that, and now I'm going to show you how to do it old school. And the old school way is infinitely better than this because it gives you more control. So that's how we're going to go about doing this. So basically, I need a mask to separate this. That's what I'm going to use to separate this, right? So if I can get a mask that'll hide this background and just float this girl on top of anything, I should be able to put in any other background, a compositor into a different background. That's going to be the goal in this. Make sense? So do I have anything I can start with here? Do I have a leg up in any of this? Or yes. So what? It is, and you could try to select the background that's all white, but you go back into all the auto selection tools, and again, they're just not that great. So other options. Color. Again, you're trying to go for all, you're trying to make Photoshop do all the work here, and Photoshop can only take you so far. I mean, you guys are bound to have had this problem, right? You go in there and it's just like, fuck, that didn't work. If you go back to the select and mask file, there was all sorts of crap around that girl's hair. I mean, it was horrible. That selection was horrible in my opinion. That's me. So, we've just had this conversation about masks. Are there any masks that are already made for this girl? I have 3 of them. And they're sitting in channels. And so what I'm going to do is look at the channels, and I'm going to find the best one to separate the hair from the background. Don't worry about separating the girl from the background. That's not the challenge. It's the superfine hair. I can do all sorts of things to get her shoulders and to get her cheek and all that kind of stuff. The hair is the challenge, right? So I'm going to start by looking at the red channel. Simply come into the channels mask and click on the red channel. This is a fucking mask. Look at how well the hair is selected already. However, I might have a better one. So I'm going to then look at the green channel. When I click on the green channel, remember what I'm looking for now is contrast between the black and between the hair and the background. You have multiple channels selected, so that's why it turns into that weird color. Do not select the eyeballs, people. You're selecting the channel, not the eyeballs. So if you've done that, go all the way back up to the top, select the full RGB guy. Do not pick eyeballs. That's not what we're doing here. We are selecting the channel. You can see the red channel is now highlighted. And you can see the contrast that I got between the girl and the background. So what I'm looking for is the most contrast. I'm going to look at the green channel and the blue and see if I can get even better contrast between the background and the hair. So I'm going to go to my green channel, and the green channel is worse. The green channel, look at the difference in the hair, especially in this area right in here. I'm going to go back to the red channel. Look at that. That is considerably darker in the red than it is in the green. So the red is still my #1 candidate. I'm going to go down to the blue channel now, and I'm going to click on that. And the blue channel is, again, it gives me more of her body, but if I go back to the red hair is much darker than it is in the green or the blue. Wouldn't you guys agree? Okay, so I'm going to make a copy of the red channel to start this whole process. Grab the red channel and drag it down to the little icon at the bottom of the channels palette that has the square with a plus in the middle. You will get a thing that's called red copy. Double click on the word red copy. We can change that, and we're going to call this knockout 1. Not 12-1. Say what? The short answer is yes. The long answer is it's more complicated than doing selections the way you think. But anyway, so I've started out here. This is a good beginning for me, but I want this to go further. Now, you can work in either way. What I'm ultimately looking for is a mask that's going to show the figure and hide the background. But if I were to use this mask right here, the hair's black. That's going to hide the hair. So that's not going to help me. However, there's nothing to stop me from inverting this. So you can hit, again, Command-I will invert it. The problem I have with this is that I hate working in the negative. So I am not going to do this at this stage of the game. I'm going to go ahead and build my mask so that it completely shows the background and hides the figure, and then I'm going to invert it when it's complete, because I don't like working in the negative. It just bothers me. If you guys don't mind, you can work this way. It doesn't matter, because you can hit Command-I all day long going back and forth, and it's not going to change anything except invert the mask. So I'm going to stick with it in the positive like this because it's just easier for me to work on. So what I want to do now is I want to make the mask even better. I want to get the hair truly black, and I want to get the background truly white. And if you hover over the background, especially on the side over here, you can see I'm reading 247s in the, that's not a true white background. If I hover over the hair in here, I'm getting in the 60s and the 50s. That's not black. I need to actually amp this up to get a much better mask. So I want everybody to do this with me. If you imagine her head as a clock face, I want you to zoom in to this area right in here that's about 3 o'clock, and I'll show you the thing that I'm actually looking for. Yeah, this is a good area that's sort of right in here. There's an area that's actually, again, if you can find it, this is sort of in that 3 o'clock area. It's coming out on the side. You can spot it by this one big sort of curl that's jumping up here, and sort of in this edge. It's actually up in here. This will be a good spot for me to actually work in. So we are going to pick points of this that actually show us the tone that we're trying to work with here. But there's a couple of things that I want to point out to you right here. So take a look at my screen here really quickly. Let me get the move tool so I have a more of a pointer. So this area right in here, you can see it's a light gray, or it's a kind of a middle gray right here. If I were to use this mask right now, this would allow a lot of the background to come through. I need to actually make this darker. But the problem that I've got is that there is hair is actually got transparency to it. So I want to keep some of that transparency. So what I need to do is I need to figure out in this hair what should be completely black in my layer mask. What should be pushed all the way. And it's not these areas in here, like this area up in here. All of this should have some transparency to it. Not a lot, but some. So we need to figure out the best place that I can actually pick that I know needs to be black. So if you look at this curl of hair that's right down in here, you can see that there's an edge here that's got a lot of sort of like lighter gray in it, but it is solid hair. There is no, I mean, it's a solid hunk of hair there. There is no background that's coming through that, unlike what's happening in this really feathery stuff up here. So this area is a good candidate for me. The other thing that you need to notice is that if I come in here and look on the inside here, there's hair in here that's actually got highlights on it that are not. So there's a highlight that's in here that's not background. There is background coming through a lot of this, but not that. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually drop a color sampler point on this area right here. To do that, come over to your toolbar. You're looking for the eyedropper tool. But you need to click on the lower right-hand corner of the eyedropper tool. You'll get a flyout menu. You do not want the eyedropper tool. All that does is sample color. What you want is the color sampler tool. So I need everybody up to the eyedropper, because you're going to do this every fucking day for every assignment that we do for the next 2 or 3 weeks, and probably for the rest of your life. I do this to this day. Color sampler tool. Come over to this area that's in that. You'll notice that you do have a 3x3 average on here. Again, it was inherited from the Magic Wand tool. Now, if you take a look at this area right here, if you hover over the area that's sort of up here that's really black, you can see I've got 22s and 22s in here. If I put my sampler there and I make that black, the area that's right here next to it that's a lighter gray will not be all the way black, because this area is in the 30s. So if I got the 20s down to black, this will still be in the teens. However, if I click on this area, so I'm just going to drop a sampler point in that area, I will, when I get that to black, the area that was already black will be black as well. Does this make sense to everybody? If I use this black up here to be my sample point, so I'm going to move my sample point up in here, it's reading 20s. If I put a curve on here to make that 0, the area that's down here that's in the 30s or the 40s will not be 0. It'll still be in the 20s. However, if I take the one that's in the 30s and the 40s down here and make it black, the 20s here will already be black. So it's just, say what?
I'm not getting the RGB without values. I don't have
It's exactly what you should have. Again, layer masks, channel masks, all of them are black and white. You cannot have color in a channel. Even though it looks like we had color in the channel, that's not a real channel. The color that is at the very top is not a real channel. So, hang on, we're getting there. We're getting there. Have I ever let you down? Okay, I'm not going to do it now. So now we've got at least the target that we want in our image to be black. Now I need to figure out the one to be white. And I typically do this close, so I'm just going to hold down my space bar, get the temporary hand, and I'm going to come out here over into the background here, and I'm going to drop a second point now. So I've got points number 1 and 2, and you can see that they are indeed in K, which is the black ink. So if you think about black ink on paper, this 82% black is very dark black. 100% black would be black black. The 0.3% or the 3% is a very light, very, very light amount of black ink. Barb. The grayer part is 1, and 2 is somewhere out on the background. Okay, the problem with this is, though, we need to actually boost the contrast in this. And the way I talk to people, how would you do that? And that's when immediately all the 3s and the 4s in this class forget that levels, curves, all that shit does contrast, right? No different. So anyway, we're going to use levels on this, but the problem with using levels and curves is they all are in RGB. So I want to see this readout, even though it is black ink, it's in K. You can change the readout. If you hover over the number 1 for the eyedropper tool and you click on the little eyedropper, you will actually get a drop-down menu and it'll say, I want you to show not the actual color, show me this in RGB values. And it will, and then do the same thing for point number 2. RGB colors, and now I've actually got my targets. I need to get this 45 of number 1 down to 0, and I need to get this 248 of number 2 up to 255, and that will be the beginnings of my mask. Does this make sense, everyone? Okay, so to do that, again, you're still working on this knockout channel. This is not, you cannot use adjustment layers for this. This is channels, not layers. So in the channels palette, I'm going to simply hit Command L. If you can't remember Command L, it's simply the adjustment up to the image menu, down to adjustments to levels, Command L. It's just the easiest way to bring it up. Now, you would think that with Command L, all you had to do would be to enter 48 into this, because again, this is 48 right here. When you bring up a curve or a level adjustment, your readouts give you befores and afters. So you can see this 45 is the before value, the 45 is the after value as well, because I haven't done any change yet. But what I'm going to do when I start to change this curve, or the levels here, is you'll start to see the second value here will actually start to change. You would think that you could just type in 45. You can't, and I don't know why this is true, but it's never been true. That would seem to me to make sense, but it doesn't. What you need to do is you need to grab the black point slider underneath the histogram right here and start to drag towards the middle, and you are watching the after value in the info palette the whole time. When you get close to 0, but before you hit 0, stop and go to your arrow keys. Go to your down arrow, your up arrow key in this case, and you need to tap it in till you just get to 0. Don't tap one more. You need to do the minimal amount that we need to reach black. Because you can see, don't do this, but you can see on my screen up here, I can drag this all the way over. I can make my entire image black. I still only have 0 in here, but that's not the mask that I want.
So there's a those values that I'm showing on this.
Have you hit Command L to bring up the levels dialog box?
Yeah, I hit Command L, but on the info section it only says
You haven't changed them then. Click on the drop-down menu underneath the eyedropper and change it to RGB readout. All right, so I'm gonna again drag this over till it gets close to 0. If you hit 0, back it off till you get a positive number and then use your arrow keys so that you get the minimal amount of adjustment that you need. Then I'm gonna go after my white point slider. I'm looking at my point number 2. I need to get that up to 255. Drag the white point slider towards the center, but stop short of 255. Go to your arrow keys and tap this in slowly so that you don't do any more correction than you absolutely have to do to get these to the place we want them. Otherwise, your mask will be too aggressive. Does this make sense? When you do this, you need to recheck your shadow value because sometimes changing one or the other will change the opposite one. Alex. Have you clicked on the point? Click on the black point. All right, so click on the black point. You've been dragging it. Don't do anything else. Just hit your up and down arrow keys. Yeah, don't use left and right. Okay. So then before you say okay to this, zoom out just a little bit. So I use the keyboard shortcut spacebar command option to zoom out just a little bit. You want to look at the quality of the edge of this. Are you keeping good feathery hair? Use your preview check mark to turn it on and off. And you can see that the change that I'm beginning to make in here. And it's actually looking pretty good for me here. So I like what's happening in here. I'm feeling good about the hair part. That was the part that I was most concerned about. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay to this. So if we zoom into the hair that's in the very top, so I'm now, if you again imagine the clock face, I'm up around 1 o'clock. There's some contamination that's happening up in here. You can work with tools on this image. So I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to make it a much smaller brush. I would say this is not a time to go to the tablet right now because we've only got like 10 minutes left here, but this is exactly when you go to a tablet to actually work on this part. Don't do it today. We will do this in spades for the rest of the semester, so you're going to get a lot of practice, but at any rate, I'm going to stick with my trackpad right now. You want to change the edge of this brush to be completely hard. A normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. Hit the X key to actually get your color to be black. And what I'm going to go in here is hit any of the things that I know are highlights that are, again, it's not background showing, it's highlights on her hair. So there's some that's happening right in here. The reason I'm using a hard brush is that I don't want to worry about overspraying anything on the outside. I typically then just use the space bar to give me the hand temporarily so that I can move around my image. And I'm going to go around and I'm just going to hit things that I know actually should be a part of it. And for the most part, I actually hit this pretty well. There's a couple of other parts that are over here that need to be added here. And so there we go. All right, I'm going to double click on the hand to jump back out. So now we've got an issue with her body. So I'm going to show you one of the great tricks of all time. So there are people who would come in here, again with a brush, the B key, and they would try to paint along this edge, and then sometimes it works, and then they'll go in with the eraser tool and they'll try to refine that. Don't do any of that. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. Instead, we are going to change the blending mode of our brush from normal down to overlay. So if we take a look at the blending groups of brushes here, it also is the blending group of layers. We're not going to get a chance to get through all the blending groups today. But basically what these are is these will have an impact on how your brush ultimately works. So if I pick darken, for instance, it will only darken pixels that are underneath it. So anyway, if you take a look at these, they are broken up in groups. The first group, well, the group at the very top is the normal group. Then you go into the darken group. Then you go into the lighten group, and then you go into the contrast group, and that's where we want to play right now. So go ahead and pick overlay. Again, I've still got a very hard brush, and then I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger, and I want you to, don't make Photoshop work harder than it has to. So I'm going to go ahead and soften my brush up to about a 50% hardness, 46%, you just need to be close. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to start painting on her arm, and look what happens here. I'm going to paint on her shoulder, and you'll see that because this is a contrast group, it's actually finding her arm. It's protecting the white that's above it, but it's actually adding density to her skin. So I do that in one pass. You can do repeated passes, hit it a second time, and you can see it's finding the edge of her body much better. Now, in certain cases, you'll actually start to stain the background that's above it. If that happens, hit the X key and paint along that same area, and you'll see it cleans up that edge. So this is a way to allow the image to find the edge for you. You do not have to find it. So I am going to zip back out, make sure that I get all of the edge down at the bottom. I'm going to go after her shoulder. I'm going to hit it a second time. I'm going to go after her chin and her neck, and I'm going to hit those a second time. Don't worry about the interior of her at all. You're just trying to get those edges. Now, if you take a look and you hover your cursor over this sort of like cove area that I've got of her hair right now, you'll see that I'm at a 241. I've got image that's actually, this is not a white background. I want to clean this up. But this gets into be a really delicate area in here for me to work on, because I don't want to destroy all the light feathery hair that I've actually picked in this. So to do that, change your brush to make it a completely soft brush. I'm going to hit the X key to make white my foreground color. I'm going to make my brush a little bit larger, and watch what I do. Watch my screen up here, just watch what I do. I'm going to hover up near the feathery part, and I'm going to click and drag away from it. Click and drag away from it. Click and drag away from it. I've done a little damage to the hair, but not much, but the background itself has now been completely cleaned out. I'm at a 255. So just a way to actually progress through this. You can then actually change the blending mode of your brush back to normal. Make it a completely hard brush again. The reason I use hard brushes is that I don't want to overspray into my background. Hit the X key to make black your foreground color, and you can paint away things like her ears. You can paint away all of her face. Stay away from the edge, that other edge that's on the other side. Stay away from that. I can paint all the way down on her body. I know all of this has got to go to be black sooner or later. Again, stay away from the edges. If you hit the edges, you've ruined all the work that we're actually trying to do here. I'm going to clip just the very edge of that necklace. I'm going to hit the other part down in here to get rid of all of that. I'm going to zoom into this little area that's still left here. I'm going to cheat and just tap across using a completely hard brush to get that part. And then to get her other shoulder, I'm going to go back to an overlay. Black is still my foreground color, and I'm simply going to paint. And you can see that actually added a whole amount of darkness up into here. Too aggressive brush work, Command Z to undo that. Only hit the part that you need to actually hit it, but you're going to need to hit it multiple times in order to get that to completely go. And then I've got some of this area that got contaminated using that. The X key to go to white, a little bit smaller brush, make it a softer brush again. And then do again the click and pull away, click and pull away, click and pull away. Now the last thing that I've got on here is the edge of her face, this right edge of her face, and it gets to be really hard to see. So to see that better, if you scroll to the top of your channels palette, you do not want to select the RGB channel, you simply want to turn its eyeball on. And what this will give you is this red overlay. What the red overlay is the black that we're actually using to paint on this image. I'm still working on my knockout channel at the bottom. You can see it's still the active one, but now I can see where this edge actually is. And so using my brush, the B key, I'm actually going to make it a completely hard brush again. Don't worry, you're going to learn better ways to do this edge work on her face later, but for right now, it's going to be the best we have. You want to put the edge of a very hard brush right on the tangent of her skin, click once, and nothing happened because I'm still at overlay. You need to change this back to normal. And then again, put that brush right on the edge, click once, and you'll see it looks like you're adding red, but the truth of it is you're adding black. And I'm just stepping my way down to get her entire face in there. And then I'm going to do the same thing, working my way up, protecting that background. And now if I turn off the eyeball for the RGB channel at the top, this is what I've actually got. If I double click on the hand, this is the layer mask that we just built. Are you kidding me? So let's see how well it works. Hover over the thumbnail, hold down the Command key and click to load this as a selection, and come over to your background layer and simply add it as a layer mask. Now when we do this, we end up with a white background that's underneath this, and I don't see any of the figure. Again, because I'm working in the exact opposite of what I should be. So hang on. Okay, did everybody finish knockout 1 or get close? If you didn't finish it, it doesn't matter. This is not homework. Hover over the thumbnail, hold down the Command key and click. It loads it as a selection. We good? Come back over to the background, copy layer, and then at the very bottom, the circle, the square with the white square with the black circle in the middle is add layer mask. Add it, and it adds a layer mask. You can see the layer mask is sitting right here. But it's doing the exact opposite of what I needed it to do. So it's still selected. You can see the brackets are around it. Hit Command I. It actually changes it. And now if you turn off the background layer, you can actually see it's this figure on transparent background. But that doesn't do me any good at all. I want to see this. I want something out of this. So click on your background layer right now. We are going to add a solid color. So to add solid color, look at the icon at the very bottom of your layers palette that's a circle, half black, half white. Click on it and come up and say solid color. And then the solid color that I want to add on here is going to be cyan. So cyan is going to be, I'm going to go to my RGB values. It would be 0 for my red, 255 for my black, and green, and 255 for my blue, and say okay. And then zoom in and take a look at this. Are you fucking kidding me? You guys just went from a $9 an hour retoucher to a $150 an hour retoucher. So let's go over it again. Where did I lose you guys? Do you have a layer mask on the figure? Wait, you did what? Oh, it is off. Yeah, if you move it, it's off. Don't worry about it. You get the whole idea. That's really the most important part. First, you need to go to selection. So hover over the thumbnail. Hold on to the keys. Click. Over here. Click. And then done. And now come up to the recovery tool. Look at the quality of this mask. Are you kidding me? So again, you're having solid color underneath it. So yeah, first, right? No, I'm just saying, this is next level. You guys just went from, okay, whatever level it was, you just walked in here. This is a whole new ball game right now. Yes.
This is a situation that's perfect for this demonstration due to white background, but often when I do it with like the whole scene behind, is there next step or
Yeah, well, baby steps. Baby steps. But you got the girl knocked out, right? Yeah. All right, other questions about this? Okay, really quickly for your homework, just to show you the homework really fast, and then we're done. So for the homework, it's this image right here called Sunny. So what I'm asking you to do, and the homework is it's explicit. So I mean it talks you through it all. But basically, what I want you to do in this is that you are going to take this image, you are going to create 4 copies, 4 layers of this exact same image. But then you're going to use layer masks on those 4, and you're going to use 1 layer to show only the sweater, 1 layer to show only the background, 1 layer to show only the skin, and 1 layer to show only the hair. In the skin layer, you can include her eyeballs and her teeth and that kind of, you don't have to, I'm not asking you to separate that part out, but you'll get what I'm really looking for here. So again, 1 layer will show only the background, 1 layer will show only the sweater, 1 layer will show only the skin, and 1 layer will show only the hair. And in theory, if it's all perfectly done, if you stack those 4 layers together, they should look remarkably like the original image. Are there questions about this? Masked layers. So again, 4 layers. You'll have the original. Then that's something we haven't talked about here. There's always an original version. So if anything goes wrong, I'll refer to the version over and over and over again. If anything goes wrong, you do not want to end up with an image that does not have a copy of your original layer intact, untouched, not masked, not contrast pulled, nothing on it. Make sense? All right, I'll see you guys next week. Oh yeah. Can I get adapters back? I think. Max, did I give you one or I'll give you one? Great. That's all right. Great. Thanks. Set it down.
So, from the channels, the stuff we selected.
Right.
So
You're really close here.
yeah, and command,
Not yet. So again, right now you got your eyeball turned on in this guy, so
Yeah,
you can
yeah.
turn that guy off because that'll get rid of the red.
Yeah.
Hover over the thumbnail, hold down your command key, and click. It's now loaded as a selection. Come over here. You're going to now add that as a layer mask. So simply click on that. It's added as a layer mask. Command D to deselect.
It's black.
Wait, that is not a layer mask on there.
Yeah.
Go back in history, undo all of this. Because it looks like you've already applied the layer mask. So keep going back in history. You got 2 layer masks.
Plenty of stuff. So, okay, let's start from here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so then we're going to add a layer mask.
So don't need to select it.
No, you've already got the marching ants
Okay.
going.
Okay, let's just.
All right, then hit Command D to deselect, and then
Yeah.
hover over the thumbnail. Don't select it. No, so you don't want to do that. You want to hover just over the thumbnail.
Yeah.
Hold down the Command key and click. So it doesn't select that, and then
Yeah.
come over here, and you're just going to add layer mask.
Just simple as that.
Yeah.
Okay. got
No, wait. So, but this is now inverted. So
And
now you
Command I.
need to invert that Command I, and that's now turn off your background layer now. Right, and this is all transparent now. So if we, last one, click on the background layer, click on it to make it active, and come down and we're gonna add another adjustment layer. Yeah, click on the adjustment layer, up to solid color. Good, and then you're just gonna click in there just to go to sort of cyanic and say okay.
Sorry.
Didn't work. And that's it. Cool. And
Yeah, quick question, just 1 minute. So, for your assisting class, we're going to do the stuff like in 30 minutes. So I have a question: how to do a perfect middle gray?
so again, if you're doing a reflected meter reading, whatever the exposure is indicated is middle gray.
That easy.
That easy.
Okay. They did it for like 4 hours, so I'm
No,
just
we
wondering.
were having issues with the screen. We think the color balance on the screen was off.
Oh,
so
it
when
could
we
easily
were-
be. So
Yeah,
if
we
you
were-
really want to, go in and calibrate those things before you use them.
When we were trying to get readings, it wasn't working, but we just
Right.
that
Right.
that was our issue.
Right. You'll be close.
So just like whatever shows up is perfect in the gray, the background.
So again, if your meter is correct,
Yeah, then
it
it's
will show up
perfect.
as middle gray.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, hang on 1 second. Hey, Alex, can you do me a favor? I'm gonna watch your stuff. Can you run this down to the media center really quickly? They close in like 5 minutes. Just give it that and tell them it's from me, and I'll sit here and babysit your stuff. Is that okay? You gotta check it out. So it's check out to me. They're expecting it back. Take that back to them and go down with them and check it out. Sorry.
Sorry for missing the beginning of class. I have no idea. There's construction on my line. Is how to turn the homework in the video.
Oh, it is. It is. It is. So
To be on campus, but to the server.
you do. Do you have your homework here?
I do.
Oh, do you want to just throw it in the server right now? Yeah. That's okay. Nothing going on you. And that's it. And then you might get a different folder.
Catch you on Friday, Prof.
Look it up. In that Dropbox, you want to just drag your homework or way on Dropbox. Instant uses into instant is more. There's a resource for that. Drop yours into the resource folder because it won't let you drop into the Dropbox. So drop into the resource folder and let's see. Oh, watch the video. It's all of that. you'll have time. I don't grade this tonight. And if I blame you for being late, just remind me that we had this conversation and it wasn't late.
Okay. Do you want me to turn it on today, or is it on back?
The sooner the better.
Okay.
Um.